Alrighty, folks, a ton coming up on today's show. President Trump making some pretty astonishing moves with regard to Russia and Ukraine. The media totally don't understand what he's doing, or they do understand and they are lying about it. Plus, we'll be joined by Harmeet Dillon over at the DOJ. First, Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders. None of those people have Daily Wire Plus memberships. And we don't want them to have Daily Wire memberships because they suck. But we want you to. Get 40% off new Daily Wire Plus annual memberships now with code SUMMER at dailywireplus.com. Also, we announced she joined the Daily Wire. You've seen her on our shows. Now, Isabel Brown has important news to share. Take a look. Isabel Brown.
Isabel Brown.
Isabel Brown.
Isabel Brown.
The wait is almost over.
She's joining Daily Wire Plus with the Isabel Brown Show.
Cannot wait for you guys to see how hard we've been working.
I could not be more excited for this new adventure.
You can expect larger-than-life guests, deeper questions.
I'm encouraged by it. I see what you're
The
seeing.
gift that you have as a woman to create life is the most badass, punk rock, incredible thing that you could possibly do.
This is an active culture war that we are still fighting, and it's vitally important that we fight now harder than ever.
To the nerds.
Meeting the President of the United States and the Vice President, and now meeting our new American Pope.
This is crazy. Freaking out. I am so psyched to be bringing you guys along on this journey. Let's jump in.
The Isabel Brown Show premieres September 8th on Daily Wire Plus. Be here for the debut, for every new series and documentary, and for every piece of breaking news. And right now, save 40% on new annual memberships with code SUMMER at dailywireplus.com. Don't miss what's next. Well, folks, as the media and Democrats fulminate over President Trump's supposed capitulation to Vladimir Putin, precisely the opposite thing seems to actually be happening. So leave it to the media and to the left to actually deliberately misinterpret what is going on. So yesterday, President Trump met with Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine. He also met with a bunch of European leaders, and we'll get to all of it. And the outcome of the meetings, again, you're not going to have an outcome until there's an actual full negotiated outcome. But what it seems to be moving toward is some Ukrainian territorial concessions in return for Ukraine getting serious security guarantees. Serious security guarantees. And it's unclear what those security guarantees would look like. It would presumably be some form of European trigger force in Ukraine that would implicate a mutual defense pact. It wouldn't exactly be NATO, but it would kind of be NATO light that had been talked about by Steve Witkoff, the special negotiator and special envoy on this issue. According to the New York Times, at the meeting among President Trump, President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, and other European leaders on Monday in Washington, there was frequent discussion of security guarantees to make sure Russia does not invade again. Prime Minister Keir Starmer of Britain has talked about assembling a force drawn from a coalition of the willing that would be stationed in Ukraine after a ceasefire or peace agreement. No one has detailed publicly what that force would look like. And it's unclear, again, the details of that thing, that's what's going to have to be hashed out here. One concept is a sort of peacekeeping force, presumably armed, that would supplement the Ukrainian military put in place for defensive purposes. Russia will probably push back against that. The problem is, to be a credible deterrent, you need tens of thousands of troops. The second possibility is a tripwire force that, again, would sort of trigger the possibility of the mutual defense coming into effect if Russia were to walk across the border. And a third possibility would be a sort of observer force that could be a few hundred troops or so to report on incoming military action. That could be accomplished with satellites and ground cameras. The question here is what exactly Ukraine will accept and what is sufficient to guarantee that Russia does not try this again? Because, of course, they did this in 2014, and then they did it again in 2022. They have a long history of repeated aggressions against the same states, grabbing territory incrementally. And so the security guarantees would have to presumably be something relatively severe. I mean, there has to be something there that is serious. Otherwise, the Ukrainians are going to say, well, you know what? We're going to keep fighting this thing because why exactly are we going to push off 3 years into the future the possibility that you abandon us if Russia walks across that border again? Now, for the Russians' part, they're pushing back against this because their goal is to leave Ukraine utterly defenseless and prostrate before them. That, of course, is the goal. The New York Times points out that Russian officials had rejected that idea of the sort of NATO Article 5-like arrangement even before Monday's meeting. A foreign ministry spokeswoman, Maria Zakharova, said that Russia, quote, categorically rejects any scenario that envisages the appearance in Ukraine of a military contingent with the participation of NATO countries. And so there is a big gap, apparently, between the Russians and the Europeans and Americans about what these security guarantees should look like. But we are moving towards something. Now, maybe we don't get there. Maybe we don't get there. Maybe it's possible that Russia walks away from the table. But the fact that President Trump is willing to hold Russia's feet to the fire by even talking about these kind of significant security guarantees is a major move from the president. And pretending that that's a pro-Russia move is silly. If there were a significant security guarantee, a sort of NATO light, an Article 5 light approach to Ukraine in exchange for territorial concessions in Donbass, that would be a masterstroke from the president of the United States, because otherwise this thing keeps going. It's that simple. Now, again, the details of what that looks like, unclear at this point. According to the Germans, they don't want to send troops to Ukraine. Shocker. Apparently, the German foreign minister, a person named Johann Wadefull, said, quote, "We are the only European troop contributor to station a combat-ready brigade in Lithuania. Doing that and also stationing troops in Ukraine would probably be too much for us," which, by the way, is really pathetic. You can't put like 2 combat-ready segments of your military in Ukraine and also Lithuania. What are you busy doing, Germany, the great industrial powerhouse on the European continent? European leaders see durable security guarantees for Ukraine, according to Politico, as key to any potential peace deal that may emerge between Kyiv and Moscow, the issue that will be a top item on the agenda for the rest of the week. Waterfall said, "We're hearing signals from Washington. They're prepared to provide security guarantees. This must then be worked out together with the Europeans, with Germany naturally having to play an important role." And again, as we said, Steve Witkoff had suggested that much more robust security guarantees and EU admission might be on the table, as well as an Article 5-like protection. So, again, this is the direction these talks are moving. And this is to the great consternation of both the media and the Democrats, who claim that Donald Trump was a Putin cat's paw. They thought that Trump was going to welcome Zelensky to the White House yesterday by berating him and telling him he needed to basically surrender in the war, no security guarantees, no economic help, no nothing. And none of that happened. In fact, it was pretty warm. Here was Zelensky arriving at the White House and meeting President Trump. So Zelensky, this time, he wore a suit. You can see, the president and Zelensky getting along here. This is not an antagonistic meeting. Zelensky was confronted by a reporter who had gotten on his case about not wearing a suit at the last meeting, knowing that was a bugaboo of President Trump's. Brian Glenn, who is dating Marjorie Taylor Greene, which says something about his personal judgment. In any case, he complimented Zelensky for wearing a suit, and Zelensky actually came right back at him, which is pretty funny.
President Zelensky, you look fabulous in that suit.
I said the same thing.
Yeah, you look good.
I said the same thing.
Yeah.
Isn't that nice? That's the one that attacked you last time. See, now he's.
I remember that.
You look wonderful. No, my first question for you, President Zelensky.
In the same suit. You see, I changed. You are.
Zelensky went right back at this reporter and said, "Well, I changed my suit and you obviously didn't. You're wearing the same suit," which is pretty funny, actually. Well, Zelensky was asked during this Oval Office tete-a-tete about whether he was going to make territorial concessions. And Zelensky smartly says, I'm going to leave this in the hands of President Trump. He's a good negotiator.
Are you prepared to keep sending Ukrainian troops to their deaths for another couple years, or are you going to agree to redraw the maps?
Thank you for your question. So, first of all, we live under each day attacks. That today have been a lot of attacks and a lot of wounded people, and the child was dead, small one year and a half. So we need to stop this war, to stop Russia, and we need support American and European partners, and we will do our best for this. So, I think we show that we are strong people, and we supported the idea of the United States, personally of President Trump, to stop this war, to make a diplomatic way of finishing this war, and we are ready for trilateral, as President said. This is a good signal about trilateral. I think this is very good. Thank you.
By the way, one of the things that Zelensky also said is that as part of any of the security guarantees put forward by Europe and the United States, Ukraine would buy $90 billion in American weapons via Europe. NATO would essentially pay for it, not America, the rest of the NATO nations. And the United States military would benefit from it, the military-industrial complex, so to speak. The defense industries in the United States would end up benefiting from that, presumably. He said a formal agreement still had to be arranged. President Trump was asked about the possibility of a trilateral meeting between the United States, Russia, and Zelensky directly.
I just spoke to President Putin indirectly, and we're going to have a phone call right after these meetings today. And we may or may not have a trilat. If we don't have a trilat, then the fighting continues. And if we do, we have a good chance. I think if we have a trilat, there's a good chance of maybe ending it. But he's expecting my call when we're finished with this meeting.
Okay, so as soon as that particular Oval Office tete-a-tete ended, all the Europeans showed up. And you can see a picture here of the full lineup of leaders at the White House. And it basically looks like a G7 convention. I mean, this is a major lineup here. You got everybody from Ursula von der Leyen to Keir Starmer to Emmanuel Macron to Giorgia Meloni of Italy and a bunch of others showing up at the White House. And apparently the meetings were very warm. They went very, very well. Mark Rutte, who's one of the people there, is the head of NATO. He says that President Trump is a pragmatic peacemaker.
This was a very successful day. And I agree with you that President Trump is a pragmatic peacemaker, as you, I think, said. And what he did this year, breaking the deadlock, starting the conversation with Putin, but also putting pressure. We have had the NATO summit, the 5%, which was a big foreign policy success of President Trump. And then he decided to, again, have lethal weapons go into Ukraine, paid for by the Europeans. And he put secondary sanctions, tariffs on India. So he's putting pressure, but he is also looking for ways to solve this, to bring this war to an end.
More on President Trump, Ukraine, the Europeans, plus redistricting and a couple of special guests coming up. First, how many times have you told someone, if it ain't broke, don't fix it? Well, that's a great piece of advice for most things. It is not great advice for your cell phone. Over time, the battery life fades. The processor can't keep up. It's fallen in the toilet, perhaps. Well, fortunately, thanks to Pure Talk, your cell phone is something you can replace without feeling guilty. When you switch to Pure Talk this month, they're going to give you a Samsung Galaxy A36 for free with a $35 qualifying plan. Just $35 a month for talk, text, data, and a free Samsung phone with scratch-resistant Gorilla Glass and a battery that lasts all day, all on America's most dependable 5G network. Obviously, we use Pure Talk all the time here at the office. I use it for all my business phone calls, which is important to me, and your phone calls are important to you. So honestly, this is a really easy call. Supporting companies like Pure Talk is a good thing. You win by cutting your cell phone bill in half. They win by hiring more Americans and helping more veterans. Make the switch in as little as 10 minutes. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro to get your free phone today. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro to switch to my wireless company, America's wireless company, Pure Talk. Also, let's say that you are, going fishing one day. And suddenly, behind the boat, a gigantic shark appeared. And as it approached, you thought to yourself, well, probably I should have listened to Shapiro and gotten Policy Genius. That's because Policy Genius makes finding life insurance simple, helping you secure real coverage so your loved ones have the financial safety net they need when it matters most. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies starting at just $276 a year for $1 million in coverage. It's an easy way to protect the people you love and feel good about the future. It's really important to have a policy because right when that shark is chomping through Robert Shaw's legs and making its way up to his torso, to the screams and horror of Richard Dreyfuss and Roy Scheider, at that point, you're thinking to yourself, life insurance, super important. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace and helps you compare quotes from America's top insurers in just a few clicks to find your lowest price. Their team of licensed agents walks you through the entire process step by step, handling the paperwork, advocating for you, while clearly laying out all your options, coverage amounts, prices, terms, with no guesswork. With thousands of 5-star reviews on Google and Trustpilot, Policy Genius has earned customers' trust by helping them find the best policy fit for their needs. Don't wait for that crisis to realize you are unprotected. Head over to policygenius.com/Shapiro to compare those top-rated life insurance policies. Get your lowest quote. Make a smart move in under 10 minutes. That's policygenius.com/Shapiro and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. Rutte also continued by saying that Ukraine is indeed prepared to discuss territorial concessions. Again, the outlines of the deal are taking form if there is to be a deal. Here's Rutte explaining.
Everybody is clear, including the president, that when it comes to territory, it is the Ukrainian president who has discussed this in the trilateral, and then probably more conversations after that with the Russian leadership, with Vladimir Putin of Russia. But today it was clear that for the Ukrainians to be willing to discuss territory and as part of an overall solution to this terrible war and to stop the killing, first we need to have full clarity collectively, US, the Europeans and the others in this coalition of the willing, on what security guarantees will mean.
And Rudy also continued by suggesting that security guarantees were basically the main issue that is still to be hashed out here.
The situation is this, that the US and some other countries have said that they are against NATO membership for Ukraine. The official NATO position since the summit in 2024 is that there is an irreversible path for Ukraine into NATO. But what we are discussing here is not NATO membership. What we are discussing here is Article 5 type of security guarantees for Ukraine, and what they exactly will entail will now be more specifically discussed.
Zelensky, for his part, he expressed gratitude to both President Trump as well as the EU leaders for their hard work on the possibility of a peace deal.
I think that we had constructive, specific meeting, and I'm very thankful to all the leaders who are here, and you help a lot, and so we're happy that we have such big unity today. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much,
for hosting us.
Mr. President.
Okay, so again, all of this was very positive. Now, apparently in the middle of the meeting with the Europeans, President Trump stepped out to arrange a meeting, or try to arrange a meeting between Vladimir Putin and Zelensky. He called Putin directly, according to a report from Axios. He stepped out of the room and did a little bit of sort of backroom negotiating. He then put out a statement on Truth Social. Quote, "I had a very good meeting with distinguished guests, President Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine, President Emmanuel Macron of France, President Alexander Stubb of Finland, Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni of Italy, Prime Minister Keir Starmer of the UK, Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, Friedrich Merz, President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, and Secretary General of NATO, Mark Rutte, in the White House, which ended in a further meeting in the Oval Office. During the meeting, we discussed security guarantees for Ukraine, which guarantees would be provided by the various European countries with a coordination with the United States of America. Everyone is very happy about the possibility of peace for Russia-Ukraine. At the conclusion of the meetings, I called President Putin and began the arrangements for a meeting at a location to be determined between President Putin and President Zelensky. After that meeting takes place, we'll have a trilat, which would be the two presidents plus myself. Again, this is a very good early step for a war that has been going on for almost 4 years. Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff are coordinating with Russia and Ukraine. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So, again, we'll have to see how all of this plays out. President Trump then called into Fox and Friends this morning to explain why he stepped out of the room in order to do a call with Vladimir Putin.
And one of the things at the table was one of the gentlemen, who's a great guy, but he said, I hope I didn't insult him. He said, well, let's meet in another month or two, and let's see if we can start, making some. I said, a month or two? You're going to have another 40,000 people dead in a month or two. You have to do it tonight. And I did, actually. I called President Putin, and we're trying to work out a meeting with President Zelensky. We'll see what happens there. And then if it works out, then I'll go to the trilat and close it up.
Okay, so there are a lot of steps between here and there. We still have to see whether Vladimir Putin actually is interested in ending the war in any serious way. Again, you have to understand that for the Russians, and we've discussed this at length, the Russian goal in Ukraine was originally to just eat the whole thing. Was to eat all of Ukraine. And then it turned out that they were unable to actually achieve that. And so their simultaneous goal has been to prevent Ukraine from entering NATO, from entering the EU, from becoming quote unquote Europeanized. They want Ukraine to essentially become a satellite state in the way that Belarus is a sort of satellite state of the Russians. And they believe that Ukraine is sort of a mote in their eye, that because Ukraine has become increasingly pro-European, increasingly pro-Western, and increasingly swiveled away from Russia, that because of that, Ukraine represents a serious impediment to the reestablishment of anything like a Russian empire. And the goal of Vladimir Putin is to reestablish Russia not just as a regional power, but as a global superpower, on par with the United States, on par with China. That is his goal. And Ukraine represents an insult to that, because Ukraine obviously was a part of the Soviet Union, because there's a long history between Ukraine and Russia, including times when Russia has dominated parts of Ukraine or the whole of Ukraine. And so the idea that a giant chunk of what Putin considers to be Russia actually is turned away from Russia is an insult to him and to the new Russian empire that he's attempting to create. So the idea that he's going to accept security guarantees from the West in exchange for a little bit more territory, the only way that he believes that that is going to be useful to him is if he believes that the West is going to renege, that he believes that the West is basically going to pull out the same way that the West did with regard to, say, Hong Kong and China. And President Trump, for his part, he believes that he can still make a deal. Now, again, this is one of the things that's kind of amazing about President Trump. He's a consummate deal maker for sure. He's very optimistic about deals all the time. He thinks he can make a deal in any situation. Now, the good thing about President Trump is that he's heterodox in his views, which means he sometimes does very creative things. But also, if things don't happen, he then will respond. He is responsive. He doesn't just stick with the idea. The idea that endless diplomacy is something that President Trump is going to pursue here is not true. If Russia will not come to the table, if he feels that Putin is jacking him around again, then he'll walk away. He will. He is not going to be bullied by Vladimir Putin here. With that said, he is optimistic. He was caught in a hot mic talking about the idea that he thinks that Putin wants to make a deal.
Yeah, I think to set up a trilateral, you know. So,
and where do you want to
I think he wants to make a deal. I think he wants to make a deal for me. You understand? I think as crazy as it sounds. Here, sit down. Sit down, everybody.
Okay.
I think we'll let the press come in for a minute.
So that was President Trump explaining that he thinks that Putin wants to make a deal with him, for him. And we'll find out whether that's true or not. I mean, bottom line is the proof is in the pudding, and none of the details have been worked out. But we are moving toward a thing. And to pretend that somehow Trump is doing Putin's work here is to ignore everything that's actually going on in favor of a pre-established narrative. That's the actual thing that's amazing here. Now, there are some members of the heretofore left who at least are being honest about this. Michael McFaul, who is President Obama's Russian ambassador, he says, listen, President Trump's actually doing a pretty good job here.
I think this was a very positive meeting. And whoever had the idea to bring all these European leaders together, in addition to President Zelensky, that was a brilliant, brilliant idea. And having it come so quickly after Alaska was also very important because now they've changed the talking points here. Just in this meeting alone, they've walked back some of the positions that the president was echoing when he met with President Putin. So this is very positive progress.
So, again, if you're honest, even if you're a Democrat, you should be acknowledging that President Trump not only is not doing anything wrong here, he's actually moving the ball forward. Now, whether we get to the end zone or not is an entirely separate question. And there's a lot of ground to cover between here and there. But to pretend that this was somehow a gigantic Trump capitulation to Putin is to ignore the actual reality of the situation. And it demonstrates the wild disconnect between reality and what Democrats think of President Trump. Susan Rice, who is, of course, a high-ranking foreign policy advisor under Barack Obama and then a domestic policy advisor under Joe Biden, former U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. She was suggesting that Trump was somehow caving to Putin. Where is the evidence for this? Where?
Trump always likes to put a positive spin on his own work and even a dishonest spin in some instances, frequently. And so I think that, he had said for weeks, if not months, that a ceasefire immediately was necessary and that was what he sought in Alaska. And if he didn't get it, he was going to be very angry and there were going to be severe consequences. And he melted in like a puddle of ice in the Alaska sunshine.
It's just ridiculous. I'm sorry, ridiculous. And coming from Susan Rice, who again was a top foreign policy advisor under Barack Obama, who literally pledged flexibility to the Russians in exchange for them going quiet before the 2012 election, and then proceeded to hand over control of Syria to them, which, by the way, resulted in catastrophe in that entire region, and handing control of Crimea and the Donbass to them, which happened in 2014. I mean, it's an amazing thing to watch these Democrats now pretend that they are hardcore on Russia. Meanwhile, Tom Friedman, who is the dumbest human alive. I mean, Tom Friedman, columnist for the New York Times, who apparently receives all of his foreign policy knowledge from random cab drivers in random countries around the world. He appeared on CNN to explain that President Trump is acting like he's neutral between a rapist and his victim. I have a question. How does he think negotiation presumably works? What's he supposed to do? Putin walks in, he just smacks him, he just backhands him? And what the hell is Thomas Friedman talking about? What a ridiculous person Thomas Friedman is.
Well, he easily could have written a tweet that said President Putin can end the war right now by getting out of Ukraine and stopping raping the country next door. So what it tells me is that we have a president who is kind of neutral between the rapist and his victim. And I find that very troubling going into this.
I'm sorry. He's the most ridiculous person. The fact that he is taken seriously as a foreign policy analyst is beyond me. Claire McCaskill, former senator from Missouri, she's doing the same routine. She says that these meetings were Trump and Putin versus the good guys, presumably Zelensky and the Europeans. There's only one problem. That's not what the evidence is.
I mean, when you are facing someone who has been as inappropriate as Trump was with Zelensky a few months ago, you bring your friends. You bring the democracies of the world. You bring the nations that have always been standing by us. We have stood by each other. And the West respects democracies. They respect the rights of their citizens. And the idea that they're all there and it's Trump and Putin versus all of the good guys.
Oh, my goodness. You know, this sort of disconnect is why people are willing to buy basically any dumb conspiracy theory. Because if you listen to MSNBC, President Trump just handed over Ukraine to Vladimir Putin. And it's not true. It's not true at all. Nancy Pelosi, meanwhile, is tweeting out something similar. Yesterday, she tweeted out, "It's curious to see the similarities between the people close with President Trump. On one hand, we have Vladimir Putin has ordered the kidnapping of tens of thousands of Ukrainian children and uses the rape of women as a weapon of war. This conduct is eerily similar to the moral depravity of Trump's other friend, Jeffrey Epstein. With his close relationships to both men, it's no surprise Trump won't release the Epstein files and wants Ukraine to cede land to Putin." What a despicable person. My goodness, Nancy Pelosi. Just the number of lies in that very, very short tweet, astonishing from Nancy Pelosi. But again, half the country is just misinformed, truly misinformed. Now, understand my view on this. I've been very clear. I think the United States should be funding Ukraine sufficient to stop the Russian invasion. In fact, I think that the United States has a strong interest in funding Ukraine and arming Ukraine sufficient to push back Russian territorial gains in the Donbass, if possible. I've been saying that for years. I've never changed my mind on that subject. I said that in August 2022, they should look for an off-ramp because that seemed to be the most auspicious time for an off-ramp along the lines of what Henry Kissinger, former Secretary of State, was talking about. But then after Putin basically walked away, and so did Zelensky, then the idea that you were going to let Ukraine fall to the Russians became ridiculous. So it is not as though I personally am sort of neutral on the question of what happens in Ukraine with regard to Vladimir Putin. I think the Russians are a nefarious force in the world. I think Vladimir Putin is one of the worst actors on planet Earth. And also, President Trump was not handing him to the keys of the car. I mean, that's like, there's no evidence that's the case. And so the consistent lying here remains a source of astonishment to me. All right, coming up, we'll get to the latest on redistricting. The Texas Democrats came back. So Brave Sir Robin is back first. You know what else is funny? When I started the Daily Wire, I thought the hard part would be creating the great content. Well, it turns out dealing with all the behind the scenes stuff, that's the stuff that eats up your time. I know I'm not alone. When you're a business owner, every second of your time is incredibly valuable. So don't waste your energy and risk losing money dealing with time-sucking payroll issues. Focus on what matters most, running your business with help from Bambee. Here's what makes Bambee different. They give you access to your very own dedicated HR manager at a fraction of what it costs to employ somebody full-time. And get this, Bambee costs just $29 a month, whether you have 10, 75, or even 100 employees. If I had Bambee when I was first building my team, it would have saved us countless hours and headaches. Instead of getting bogged down with paperwork and compliance issues, I could have focused on growing the show and connecting with my audience. With Bambee's HR Autopilot, you'll never have to waste your valuable time getting into the weeds of HR policies, onboarding, or terminations. Plus, Bambee is month-to-month, no hidden fees. You can cancel anytime. Right now, get 1 month of Bambee for just $1. Go to Bambee.com. Type in Ben Shapiro under podcast to schedule your first call with an HR manager right now. That's 1 month of Bambee for just $1 at BAMBEE.com. Ben Shapiro podcast. Also, have you ever wondered why elite athletes, business moguls, high performers are using Armra colostrum? Well, it's because Armra colostrum packs over 400 natural nutrients that work at the cellular level to build muscle, speed recovery, and boost performance. No artificial stuff, just pure fuel for whatever it is you're tackling. Think of it as your body's natural defense upgrade. It strengthens your immune barriers throughout your entire body while supporting your gut-wall system for better digestion and less bloating. Plus, it helps your body absorb nutrients more effectively and keeps your metabolism running smoothly. You'll also notice the difference in your skin's radiance thanks to natural antioxidants and collagen-boosting compounds. Plus, there's a reason elite athletes have been using colostrum for years. It enhances endurance and speeds up recovery so you can bounce back faster. The bottom line, Armra Colostrum gives your body comprehensive support to thrive naturally. We've worked out a special offer for my audience. Receive 30% off your first subscription order. Go to armra.com/Shapiro or enter Shapiro to get 30% off your very first subscription order. That's armra.com/Shapiro, armra.com/Shapiro, or enter Shapiro to get 30% off your very first subscription order. Okay, meanwhile, remember that time that Texas Democrats, they were the resistance. They ran away bravely like Sir Robin from Monty Python. They ran far away in order to prevent the Texas House from achieving a quorum, thus to prevent redistricting. Well, it turns out they came back and then the redistricting happened. According to the Wall Street Journal, roaring cheers from supporters greeted Texas House Democrats as they returned to the Capitol midday on Monday after a 2-week walkout. Their return all but ensures the passage of a Republican-backed redistricting plan sought by President Trump, but the Democrats' allies think the walkout did a good job of drawing national attention to the GOP redistricting effort and generating pushback to it. So a bunch of Democrats showed up in the well of the state capitol to chant about how they had really fought back. They'd put Texans first, and they'd fought back by running away and then eventually coming back. Oh, just more ridiculous signaling. Look at those heroes. Look at those stalwart heroes getting the big cheers they deserve for going on a 2-week unpaid vacation to Chicago and Washington, D.C., and then coming back just in time for Republicans to do what they wanted to do in the first place. According to the Wall Street Journal, Texas House Democrats on Monday confirmed they were back in Austin and ready to end their 15-day quorum break after encouraging states like California to take measures to counter the proposed redistricting in Texas. Republican Governor Greg Abbott ordered the second 30-day special session after the Democrats' walkout stymied the first. A procedural move disallowing members from leaving the chamber without permission remained in effect on Monday. House Speaker Dustin Burrows said the Democrats who had been absent would be released only under the custody of state troopers until the body reconvenes later this week. Basically, you are coming to work whether you like it or not. So it turns out that was all a giant fail. But the good news is, I guess, that J.B. Pritzker got to have his moment blotting out the sun. And J.B. Pritzker put out a tweet saying, "Thank you, Representative Wu." This would be Gene Wu, who is a representative who fled to Illinois, one of the most gerrymandered states in America, in order to prevent redistricting in Texas. Pritzker said, "Thank you, Representative Wu, for trusting us to defend democracy alongside you. We need more fighters like the Texas House Democrats." Do you? Because they lost. I noticed that. Now, it'll be interesting to see, by the way, how the Texas redistricting actually impacts the map, because right now, a bunch of districts are going to get redrawn. And in 2024, President Trump won every Republican-held House district in Texas by double digits. And there are some districts that were starting to turn red because of the large-scale movement of Hispanics away from the Democratic Party. But it is possible that in future elections, those Hispanic voters may turn back toward the Democratic Party. In fact, there's some decent poll data suggesting some disillusionment with the Republican Party on behalf of some of the Texas Hispanic population, particularly along the border with Mexico. This is a point that's being made by Eli McCown Dawson over at Nate Silver's Substack, that the Texas House districting might not actually achieve what it seeks to achieve, because there are 5 Texas districts that are supposed to flip from blue to red, the 932nd, 35th congressional districts. Harris won all 3 of those districts in 2024 under the old congressional map. Under the new map, parts of each district would be moved into more suburban areas that voted for Trump in 2024, and that means that he would have won all 3 districts in 2024 and 2020. But the other 2 districts, the 28th and 34th, are a less straightforward win for Republicans. The 28th and 34th are located in South Texas on the border with Mexico. They are both majority Hispanic. And so it is possible that, again, those are districts that the Biden won actually in 2020, and that in 2024, President Trump won. But if there is a reversion to the mean in terms of Hispanic voting patterns, then you could see a world where actually Hispanics drive in Texas those districts back into the arm of the Democrats, which means you won't gain 5 seats. You'll essentially gain 1. I mean, that is possible as well. So again, this is the thing about redistricting. No matter how much you think you can redistrict a bunch of seats of the opposition out of existence, if the people don't like the way that the politics is going, they will vote the other way. Meanwhile, California Democrats, according to the Washington Post, are going to take their first official steps this week in the national battle over redrawing congressional maps as they return to Sacramento to adopt a measure asking voters to approve new boundaries for 2026, 28, and 30 that could create as many as 5 new House seats for their party. The aggressive legislative maneuvering by Governor Gavin Newsom and Democrats who control the legislature is intended as a check on President Trump and his effort to tilt the midterm elections in Republican favor. They are pushing forward. Again, the goal for the Democrats is to make Gavin Newsom the 2028 nominee. I mean, that's really what they are attempting to do at this point. Gavin Newsom, for his part, continues to tweet like an idiot. I don't understand exactly what he is doing at this point. It is quite bizarre. He's putting out these all caps tweets that are designed to, I don't know, imitate President Trump in some way. He put out a tweet yesterday showing himself on Mount Rushmore. And I know he thinks he's trolling, but he just looks like a doofus. I mean, truly a doofus. Now, that doesn't mean he might not be the nominee. He might be. I mean, Democrats are very susceptible, as we say, to all of this sort of posturing and virtue signaling, which is why they will cheer when Cory Booker speaks for 24 hours or Hakeem Jeffries stands up there with a catheter for 7 hours and jabbers. But, is that actually going to effectuate a stop to President Trump's policies? I think not. Unlikely. Now, meanwhile, the media, which have been doing all the dirty work for the Democrats for literally my entire lifetime, they're in a very serious situation. So there's a report yesterday that MSNBC is now rebranding itself. It will no longer be called MSNBC. They are celebrating a change in their branding. Here was Joe Scarborough announcing.
This morning, a new name for the network by the end of the year. We will become MS Now, which stands for My Source for News, Opinion, and the World. And look, Andrew, they even have a graphic up. I like it.
There it is.
Actually,
the new logo.
It looks very sporty.
It sounds like a charity for fighting multiple sclerosis. What is MS Now? There are a lot of very good jokes online. One person posted, "I'm not looking for Miss Now. I'm looking for Miss Right." I don't even know what that's about. Why not just like, they could have come up with something better than that. Seriously, like something better. Why MS Now? You just want to keep the same number of letters? Are you that desperate to ensure the reusability of your 5-letter captions or something? You couldn't come up with anything better than that? Very, very weak sauce. I believe that the original origin of MSNBC was that it was Microsoft and NBC, and that's how it became MSNBC. So now they're just trying to rebrand. Okay, it's a weird move. It's a weird move. But again, that is simply because they are having serious ratings troubles. And they've been having serious ratings troubles for quite a while, MSNBC. They're trying everything they can to actually rebrand in a serious way. According to the New York Post, it was mercilessly raked over the coals by the internet. People talking about maybe it was most surely no one watching or BS Now. Apparently, they were forced to do this, I guess, because of the upcoming spinoff by Comcast to a new publicly traded company called Versant. So short sell whatever owns MSNBC, or MS Now, as they say. They're getting rid of the Peacock. One former media executive told the Post, I don't know what's worse, Versant or My Source News Opinion World. Whoever came up with these names deserves to be shown the door. It is very weird. It is a very weird move by MSNBC. Don't really get it, but, don't get a lot about their coverage. Meanwhile, joining us online is Harmeet Dillon. She, of course, is Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice. And, of course, before she joined the administration, her law practice focused on a wide variety of issues, including she helped us out when we were suing the federal government over Joe Biden's vax mandate. Harmeet, thanks so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben.
So why don't we start with the situation in Washington, D.C. Obviously, the president has sent federal forces into Washington, D.C., which he has the authority to do. He has also said that he wants to take control of the police department, which he also has the authority to do. What is the goal here? How is the DOJ going to be involved in prosecution of crime in the District of Columbia?
Well, you're seeing it in real time. The president has seen the news like everyone who lives here. I'm a D.C. resident now working at the DOJ, and everyone is aware of the pervasive crime. It isn't just in one area or the other. It's literally near the White House, near Capitol Hill, and you can't escape it. And so, this is what is happening is now we're seeing a completely ineffective local law enforcement. So the federal government is taking over. You're seeing our U.S. Attorney, Judge Shapiro, prosecuting street crime. There's arrests happening overnight, dozens and dozens. And this is the type of law enforcement that the local authorities could have done for the last several decades and simply for political reasons chose not to do. And so I personally feel much safer as a DC resident. And I'm hearing that from people who aren't involved in politics as well. I wish this could happen all over the country, but of course the president has the authority to do it here and not elsewhere. Our attorney general here in the building, Pam Bondi, is also very invested in this. She's meeting regularly with police. And, this is just a whole night and day situation here in D.C.
It's kind of amazing the difference between the chattering classes on TV, what they're saying about this, talking about tyranny, and what is actually happening in the District of Columbia, where the federal government does have plenary power to actually do things like prevent crime, because, of course, it is a federal district. It is not an independent state. What's been the reaction so far of residents inside D.C. to all of this?
I haven't heard a single negative reaction from anybody who's a non-multimillionaire TV host who lives here in the district. I think people are happy about it. I mean, you do see crime tape all over the place before this happened, and the crime is pervasive. And so I actually moved to New York in the 1990s when Rudy Giuliani was the mayor, and it was a similar situation where overnight you start to use that broken window theory and prosecute all the street crime and the turnstile jumpers and all of that, and suddenly the whole tone of the place picks up, value goes up, people move in. I hope that happens to our city as well.
And well, meanwhile, the Civil Rights Division over at the Department of Justice has changed its orientation and is actually, trying to enforce civil rights, including on issues like Title IX. What's the latest on the DOJ's approach to Title IX?
Well, Title IX has been something that we jumped right into at the beginning, and this has been a big priority for the Trump administration, and it's at multiple levels. So at the college level, we are engaging in conversations with universities that we're entering into settlement negotiations with, and many of those have Title IX components. For example, University of Pennsylvania has agreed to not allow boys to compete, men to compete in young women's sports. We're looking at situations where universities are requiring sororities, fraternities to admit people of the opposite sex than what their preference is, and we're trying to get them to stop doing that. We're emphasizing privacy, but I want to also let your viewers and listeners know that we're actually also focusing on K through 12. That's a very important priority. And right here in our backyard in D.C., in the suburban Maryland areas, you're seeing open defiance of federal law and Title IX in these suburbs. You're seeing these schools punish two boys who complained about a young woman identifying as a boy, coming into their locker room. We believe both boys and girls have privacy rights, and they're being violated by Virginia schools. We're seeing this happen in other schools as well, and I'm engaged in litigation on behalf of the DOJ in California against California Interscholastic Federation, which administers the school sports in California and allows boys to compete in girls' sports, take their trophies, take their opportunities for scholarships, and take away their self-confidence. This is completely unacceptable, contrary to the law, and we're not going to stand for it at this Department of Justice.
Actually, one report that's coming out from the backyard over there is Loudoun County. Their public schools are now going to maintain a policy apparently allowing so-called transgender students, boys who believe they are girls or the reverse, to use facilities that match their gender identity despite an order from the DOE. How's the DOJ going to be dealing with situations like this?
Well, we also sent a letter to Loudoun County on this issue, and I saw this member of the school board, I believe, or administrator mouth off about this, how they were going to ignore the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Education and presumably DOJ. We'll see about that. I don't think that's going to happen.
Well, that is Harmeet Dillon, Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Justice, doing a fantastic job over there. Harmeet, really appreciate the time. Thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you for having me, Ben.
Meanwhile, the lamentations, the wailing, lamentations, gnashing of teeth, rending of garments on behalf of Stephen Colbert continues apace. Yesterday, Conan O'Brien issued a statement talking about how sad he was about Stephen Colbert, who's speaking at the Television Academy Hall of Fame. And he said, it's just very, very sad what happened to Stephen Colbert. Honestly, it's sadder what happened to Conan in late night. I'm old enough to remember when Conan was in late night, and he's better than all these guys were. Here he is, very, very sad about the demise of Stephen Colbert's wildly overexpensive late night show.
Late night television, as we have known it since around 1950, is going to disappear. But those voices are not going anywhere. People like Stephen Colbert are too talented and too essential to go away. It's not going to happen. Yeah, he's not going anywhere. Stephen is going to evolve and shine brighter than ever in a new format that he controls completely.
He is going to go on and thrive at MS Now, where he will undoubtedly be the late night host at MS Now, whatever that means. So good luck. By the way, I love when people act as though things sort of passively happen in the universe. The reason that late night is dead is because you guys killed it. Greg Gutfeld's doing fine in late night. It's just that you guys aren't funny. And you guys hate the right. And so every single one of your hosts was berated for the great sin of not treating the right as anathema. That's a you problem, my dude. That is a Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel problem. Late night didn't kill itself. All right, coming up, Taylor Swift has actually released a new album cover, and it's kind of, like a little on the R2X rated side, which is a little shocking for her. I know, you might not care about that, but you know what you will care about? Roughly 36% of Americans have below average credit scores, which can make borrowing more difficult and expensive. That means home loans, cars, more, just continually out of reach, and that is where Kickoff can help. Users with credit under 600 grew an average of 84 points in their first year with on-time payments. You can start building your credit right away for just $1 in your very first month. The best part is that AutoPay takes care of everything automatically, so you're building credit even while you sleep without ever having to worry about missing a payment. The whole sign-up process only takes a few minutes right from your phone. No credit check required. You can cancel whenever you want. No wonder it's the #1 credit builder on the App Store. Start building credit with Kickoff today. You can get your first month for as little as $1. That's 80% off the normal price when you go to getkickoff.com/Shapiro today. That's kickoff without the C. Get KIKOFF.com/Shapiro. Must sign up via getkickoff.com/Shapiro to activate offer. Offer applies to new Kickoff customers first month only. Subject to approval. Offer subject to change. Average first-year credit score impact of plus 84 points. Vantage score 3.0 between January 2023 and January 2024 for Kickoff credit account users who started with a score below 600, who paid on time, and who had no delinquencies or collections added to their credit profile during the period. Late payments may negatively impact your credit score. Individual results may vary. And meanwhile, in other cultural news, I have to note that Taylor Swift has a new album cover. I know. We have to give these updates. Apparently, they're more newsworthy than actual news. But I have been told by many sources, myriad and sundry, that it's very important that we talk about Taylor Swift's new album cover. So here is what Taylor Swift's new album cover looks like. Here is the image. By the way, she is so overexposed. My goodness. If you search Taylor Swift on Google, which I just did because I'm trying to look up her album cover, there's like actual Google graphics that appear with animation of glitter falling because she has released the Life of a Showgirl album cover. And apparently it is her in like a bathroom stall or something. I'm very confused as to what is going on here. She is bent over at the waist, putting her arms against a wall while wearing a showgirl outfit that's cut up thigh high, essentially. All right. Okay, so I'm looking through her old Taylor Swift album covers now. First of all, I have to say it looks like she's done some facial work because she looked very different in 2006. In any case, Taylor Swift 2006 looks like it's like a normal country album cover. And then I guess her 2008 album, same kind of thing. 2010 album, same kind of thing. 2012 album, just a close-up of her face. Then there's the 1989 album where it's basically a Polaroid of her wearing an outfit from 1989. There's her Reputation album where it looks as though she's kind of doing a quasi-Madonna thing with her hair slicked back. Her Lover album, she is clad. Her Folklore album, she's just out in the forest. Her Evermore album, she's still out in the forest. Midnight, she is carrying a lighter. The Tortured Poets department we start to get into. It was really the last 2 years. We start to get into the sort of like, let me lie on a bed in kind of softcore pornographic fashion. So Tortured Poets department, she's lying on a bed, reclining on a bed. And now Life of a Showgirl, she has multiple album covers, I guess. One of them is her half underwater, wearing a showgirl outfit, kind of, which I don't know why she would wear that in the bath. That seems like not a great way to bathe. And then there's her bending up against a wall, almost like, what's her face? Sabrina Carpenter. I don't know who these people are. But I will say that it is slightly regressive, no? I mean, like, it's kind of weird that all of your feminist heroes are now engaged in semi-pornographic album covers. That's kind of strange, isn't it? I understand that it was transgressive back in the 1980s when Madonna was doing it, but it's not transgressive anymore. It's actually sort of bizarrely regressive. And again, from a conservative point of view, I'm not generally in favor of people selling their works by becoming scantily clad. It's not my thing. But just from a feminist perspective, I'm confused why feminists think this is some sort of advancement. Very strange. And meanwhile, other controversy in the cultural sphere. So apparently there have been these male cheerleaders that everybody's been steadfastly ignoring since like 2018, but now they've broken back out into the open. And some video has emerged of one Minnesota Vikings cheerleader who is a flamingly gay man who is kind of doing a Dylan Mulvaney impression without the sex change. And I'm just wondering why. Like, why? Why is this? Why? Here we go. Like, why is he doing the female moves? Why is this like he looks like an idiot? I'm sorry, he looks like a complete ridiculous moron. He's dancing around and swiveling his hips, and it doesn't have the same impact when it's a dude as when it is a lady. Now, again, as a conservative, I'm not a big fan of the female cheerleaders on the sideline either, because I just think that it's become sort of a glorified stripper pole thing. But having a dude do it is ridiculous, like laughably ridiculous. It's like Bugs Bunny putting on a dress and lipstick and dancing around out there. And we're supposed to believe that this is sort of liberating. Who's the audience for this? Legitimately, who is the audience for this? It just ridiculous. He looks like an idiot. Okay. I will say that, as I've pointed out before, my understanding is that male cheerleading did not involve effeminate gyrations by men, typically. It typically involved either like rah-rahing or actually physically picking up ladies and throwing them in the air. As I suspected, this is not how cheerleading originally went. So I asked our sponsors over at Comet, what is the history of male cheerleading and when did it start to involve men dancing like women? Quote, male cheerleading has its origins in the late 19th century, specifically in the 1860s and 1870s at Ivy League college sporting events in the United States. Initially, cheerleading was exclusively a male activity, with men known as yell leaders, leading crowds with chants and basic movements focused on audience engagement and school spirit. The activity remained predominantly male until World War I, and especially World War II, when men went off to fight and women began to take over roles on cheerleading teams. During the early male-dominated years, cheerleading was not associated with dance or the more stylized movements often linked with femininity. The routines were simple. The main role of male cheerleaders was to lead crowd chants and encourage spirit rather than performing dances. It was female cheerleaders who introduced more synchronized routines, tumbling acrobatics, and the use of paper pom-poms, gradually transforming cheerleading into chant-focused crowd leadership to a performance-based activity involving dance elements. The transition to men participating in dance-style routines similar to those traditionally associated with women occurred much later. For decades, the style of male cheerleading continued to emphasize strength, athletic stunts, and cheerleading leadership rather than dance. It was only as cheerleading developed into competitive and more performance-oriented sport in the late 20th century, especially from the 1980s onward with televised competitions and camps, that both male and female cheerleaders began participating in routines involving dance, tumbling, and stunts. Even then, men typically performed partner stunts, tumbling, and lifts, while women led in dance-style movements and choreography. So, in other words, this is relatively new, and we mean like the last few years. This ridiculous, silly, stupid, idiotic, moronic-looking routine in which the men are just doing female movements. And yes, women move differently than men. I love that we live in a society where we're supposed to jab an ice pick into our eye socket in order to get rid of our prefrontal cortex, and we're supposed to pretend that men and women move similarly. They do not. That is stupid. And a man doing the same moves as a woman looks like a moron. Period. That's all. And I mean, we all know what this is, right? I mean, what this is supposed to be is, hey, look, a gay man who's dancing like a woman. Stop pretending. In all the coverage of this, it is irritating. The sort of gaslighting is irritating. I don't care about this very much, honestly, because, as I've said, I don't like any of the sort of modern cheerleading routines. I think that they're over-sexualized and they look like there's something straight out of a strip club. But what does get my goat is the gaslighting. Where I say, well, males have been cheerleaders for centuries, for going back almost 200 years, males have been cheerleading. It's like, no, it's not the same thing. Once again, you are taking terms and you are robbing them of their meaning, and then you are supplanting them with an alternative, stupid meaning. And then you are pretending that, you think men were dancing like this schmuck back in 1870 or 1940 or hell, 1990? Not a thing. Not a thing. And pretending it is a thing leads to the normalization of something that looks incredibly dumb. Meanwhile, there is something happening in the culture, and I think one of those things that's happening is the normalization of being just kind of a normie conservative. Chris Pratt, the actor who is in Guardians of the Galaxy, among many other successful movies. Chris Pratt, for a long time, has been ripped up by the internet for not being sufficiently to the left. And now he's basically saying, you know, there's a lot of people out there who have Trump derangement syndrome. They're totally insane. Here he was with Bill Maher.
And in politics, you inherit enemies. And when you jump on you know, the bandwagon with who is, you know, the most divisive president ever, it makes sense that you're going to be made to look terrible. And so I don't know what to believe, because it's not like I sit with Bobby and I go, so hey, let's talk about this. Let's talk about. It's like we're just playing cards or playing Mafia or having fun or having dinner. I'm not going to pick his brain to find out exactly which of those things are true. I just kind of assume that none of them are. And for the most part, I wish him well, man. I hope there's certain things that he oversees that seem to be supported in a bipartisan way, like getting terrible toxic stuff out of our kids' food. I think that's a great thing. And so if you do that, that's amazing. I'd hate to be so mired in hatred for the president that any success from his administration is something I'd have an allergic reaction to. To be like, oh, well, if they do it, I don't want it to happen. I'll put Clorox in my children's cereal myself. You know, it's like, come on, be reasonable here. There's certain things that would be a good thing to have. I want them all to be successful.
Wow, things that you weren't allowed to say until 5 minutes ago in Hollywood. So the times are changing. Similarly, Anthony Mackie has been actually out there saying some relatively conservative things. Again, as long as we're in the Marvel universe. Here he was a few months ago on the Pivot podcast talking about the death of the American male.
In the past 20 years, we've been living through the death of the American male. They have literally killed masculinity in our homes and our communities, for one reason or another. But I raised my boys to be young men. And however you feel about that, you feel about that. Right. But my boys will always be respectful. They will always say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am. No, sir, no, ma'am. They will always say thank you. They will always open a door for a lady. They will always make sure that their mother is taken care and provided for. They will always be men. And that's always since they were 2 years old. Every time I left for a job, I tell my 15-year-old, you're the man of the house. You make sure these doors are locked every night. This alarm is on. You text me or you call me every night before you go to bed and you wake up. I love that. Because we're men.
Okay, again, this coming back into style is a good thing. It is a good thing. Males need something to do. Males are quite important to society. And when you rob them of their purpose, when you rob them of their initiative, when you rob them of their roles, what you end up with is a crisis, a real crisis. Really interesting piece by Robert Putnam and Richard Reeves over at the New York Times called The Boy Crisis of 2025 Meet the Boy Problem of the 1900s. Quote, in the early years of the 20th century, America had a boy problem. Boys on the street making trouble, boys becoming truants, boys getting caught up in crime. The problem spread across the United States alongside the disruptions of technological change, immigration, and growing socioeconomic inequality. Policymakers stepped in with universal public schooling, for example, but it was the civic response that was truly extraordinary. In less than a decade, most of today's major child-serving organizations were founded. Big Brothers, the Federated Boys Clubs, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, and 4-H. Many boys and men are struggling today, too. And in America, once again disrupted by technological change, immigration, and growing inequality. Since 2010, suicide rates among young men have risen by a third. They are now higher than they are among middle-aged men. The share of college degrees going to men has fallen to 41%, lower than the women's share in 1970. 1 in 10 men aged 20 to 24 is effectively doing nothing, neither enrolled in school nor working. That's twice the rate in 1990. This crisis demands a response equivalent to what the progressive era delivered, not just in public policy, but equally important from our civic institutions. And he talks about, what government is attempting to do and men and boys being left behind. And he quotes a bunch of different political figures talking about this problem. Pushes from Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan and Spencer Cox in Utah and Wes Moore in Maryland. And Moore, for example, in his 2025 State of the State address in Maryland, he said, our mission is to uplift men and boys. It's not in conflict with our values to leave no one behind. It's in concert with them. As the father of a son and a daughter, I want both my children growing up with all of their God-honoring and God-given opportunities. But the reality is that the major fall-off for boys and men is in the civil sphere. It is not in the governmental sphere. It is not about the government spending more money on boys and men. It really is not. What it is about is the death of many of those same social institutions. They write, it takes a village to raise a child, but some of the villagers must be men. This is where civic institutions should come in, providing places and spaces where boys and young men learn what it means to be a grown man. But in 2025, they're struggling to fulfill that role for two main reasons. First, there are simply fewer organizations with an explicit mission to serve boys and men. Most of the ones formed during the last boy crisis have gone co-ed, sometimes as the result of a merger. Most now serve more girls than boys. An exception is Boys and Girls Clubs, which renamed itself in 1990 and still serves slightly higher shares of boys, 55%, than girls. In other cases, previously male-serving institutions have gone co-ed, while their sister organizations have remained single-sex. So Boy Scouting no longer exists. They're now Scouting America, but they're still Girl Scouts, for example. The YMCA banned gender discrimination in 1978. Second, there's a dearth of male volunteers, making it harder to provide services for boys and young men. Only 20% of young 4-H volunteers are men. Organizations are beginning to respond. There's an attempt to reach out, but one hindrance to male volunteering is the fear of being seen as a potential predator. This has also reduced the enthusiasm among some parents for single-sex environments. The abuse scandals that rocked the Catholic Church and Boy Scouts understandably led many parents to worry about their children in male-oriented organizations. Settlement for claims against the Boy Scouts has reached $7 billion, more than the annual expenditure of many U.S. states, but the attention to child safety in those organizations is now paramount. Okay, but here's the reality. You know what used to solve this problem was church groups. You know what used to solve this problem was social groups that were led by men for men. The thing that is not mentioned anywhere in this article is the rise of feminism, which said that it was uniquely bad for men to hang out together, for men to train boys to be boys. The reason that Boy Scouts of America changed to Scouting America is because of feminism. It is because of the movement to destroy maleness as a concept. The idea was that girls can also be Boy Scouts because boy has no meaning. The complete androgyny that was pushed by the left for decades on end had a predictable result, which was, sure, it meant that women could engage in more male-centric occupations, but it also meant that men were basically told that there was nothing special about them, nothing that they were uniquely supposed to do. You know, for most people, when you say that you should act like a man, most people know what that means. They know what that means. But we forcibly told ourselves that we weren't allowed to say things like that. There was something bad about gender stereotypes. Teaching a boy to be a man was somehow a terrible thing. You had to teach him to become an androgynous widget who might choose to become transgender or effeminate later in life. Well, that's a terrible thing for a boy. It is a terrible thing for a boy. Boys need to learn to be men. They need to learn to defend and protect and be dutiful. And you know what? There are actual aesthetic measures that are important to that. So yes, young boys wearing dresses is a bad thing. It is not a good thing. It is not a matter of apathy, of moral apathy, nor should it be. Boys should be trained to dress like their dad. They should be trained to act like their dad and their granddad and their great-granddad. That is an important, and when you lose that, what you end up with is indeed androgynous widgets, atoms in a machine that are not in coordination with, that no molecules ever get formed. And then the society comes apart and males fail. And that's what we are watching right now. We're watching it more and more. And then, out of a desperate need for both attention and camaraderie, people find these groups online that essentially tell them that they are wanted and they are needed and they are necessary, but only as a resistance to, quote unquote, the system. And the more wild and outrageous the group, the more solid the core, the more the solidarity is required, the more skin in the game. And that's how you end up with the sort of polarization of men. That's how you end up with the extremism of young men. It is a direct reaction to the dissolution of all the social fabric that supported young men, built them up, trained them, and made them useful to the societies in which they live. Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. We'll get to Fed Chair Jerome Powell has a speech today that is really going to shape the next few months of economics in the United States. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro. Check out for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us. A new study shows the Democratic Party absolutely bleeding voters. Plus, Gavin Newsom is making his 2028 run. And for some reason, Cracker Barrel is changing its logo. But first, right now on Daily Wire Plus, stream brand new episodes of The Secret Vatican Files. Be here for the premiere of The Isabel Brown Show on September 8th. And don't miss the Decade of the Daily Wire anniversary special coming soon. Plus, so much more. Here's why you should do it now. You'll save 40% on new annual memberships when you join today. Use code SUMMER at dailywireplus.com. Well, President Trump has basically broken the Democratic Party at this point, and that is not just a matter of opinion. That is a matter of actual voter registration fact. There's a fascinating new piece out from the New York Times by Shane Goldmacher and Jonah Smith, all about the Democratic Party facing what they're calling a voter registration crisis. Now, of course, the New York Times, a very left-wing publication, but when even the New York Times is noting the Democrats have a massive voter registration problem, that means it's a massive voter registration problem, and the data here is good data. According to these columnists, the Democratic Party is hemorrhaging voters long before they even go to the polls. Of the 30 states that track voter registration by political party, Democrats lost ground to Republicans in every single one between 2020 and 2024, often by a lot. That 4-year swing toward the Republicans adds up to 4.5 million voters, a deep political hole that could take years for Democrats to climb out from. So where is that happening? Well, it's happening everywhere. Battleground states, blue states, red states, according to a new analysis of voter registration data by the New York Times. Few measurements reflect the luster of a party's brand, says the New York Times, better than voter registration. And right now, the Democrats are losing it. For the first time since 2018, more new voters nationwide chose to be Republicans than Democrats last year. Now, I know that the tendency on the part of the right for this sort of stuff is to be incredibly celebratory. It should be remembered that in 2018, Republican registration outpaced Democratic registration, and then Republicans didn't do amazing in the 2018 midterms, and then they lost the 2020 elections. So things can shift fast, but Democrats are in trouble. All told, Democrats lost about 2.1 million registered voters between 2020 and 2024 in those 30 states, and Republicans gained 2.4 million. There are still more Democrats who are registered nationwide than Republicans because California allows people to register by party. Texas does not, but the trajectory is really, really bad. So, for example, Election Day 2020, Democrats had an 11 percentage point edge over Republicans. And now that is a 6-point edge in 2024. Michael Pruser, who does data science for Decision Desk HQ, says, I don't want to say the death cycle of the Democratic Party, but there seems to be no end to this. There's no silver lining. There's no cavalry coming across the hill. This is month after month, year after year. This is true in battleground states like Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Pennsylvania. Top Democratic strategists say the party's nationwide registration decline is hidden in plain sight crisis that has to be reversed before 2028. In 2018, Democrats accounted for 34% of new voter registrations nationwide. Republicans were only 20%. By 2024, Republicans had overtaken Democrats among new voter registrants. Now, one of the big problems here for the Democrats is that they banked on a multiracial coalition in opposition to basically white Americans. That was the way they did voter registration. If they were doing a voter registration drive, they would go into heavily minority areas, just sign up everybody, and assume all of those people were going to be Democrats. And it's not working anymore. That's not according to me. That's according to the New York Times. Quote, for years, the left has relied on a sprawling network of nonprofits, which solicit donations from people whose identities they need not disclose to register Black, Latino, and younger voters. Though the groups are technically nonpartisan, the underlying assumption has been that most new voters registering would vote Democratic. Trump has upended that calculation with the inroads he made among working-class non-white voters. According to one expert, Maria Cardona, who's a longtime member of the DNC, she says you can't just register a young Latino or young Black voter and assume they're going to know it's Democrats that have the best policies. So what exactly are they to do? Well, again, they have a massive problem because that multiracial coalition is now growing on the Republican side of the aisle. This, by the way, is one of the reasons why the Republican Party should not move in the sort of identitarian direction that is being pushed by some on the right. Because it's very bizarre. As the Republican Party turns less identitarian in terms of its voting base, there are people in the Republican Party who want to turn more identitarian in terms of the Republican ideology, which makes zero sense at all. Picking up Hispanic voters in Florida and Texas is a good thing. And driving those Hispanic voters away by sort of ethnic-based appeals to white voters is really dumb. And I don't think that's what President Trump is doing. I don't think that's what the Republican Party broadly is doing. But there are certain people in the Republican Party who are doing this routine, and it's really stupid. I mean, forget about being morally wrong. It is also incredibly politically dumb. Right now, according to the New York Times, the Democratic Party has diminished appeal to men and younger voters. In 2018, Democrats accounted for 66% of new voters under the age of 45 who registered with one of the two major parties. By 2024, that number had dropped to 48%. So Republicans went from roughly 1/3 of newly registered voters under 45 to a majority in the last 6 years. Male voters particularly are falling out of the Democratic orbit. Nearly 49% of men newly registering with a major party chose the Democrats in 2020. By 2024, that figure was down to 39%. And by the way, it's happening among women as well. So what exactly should Democrats do? Well, it seems that their plan is to be radical but ethnic. They're not going to moderate in any way. They're not going to move away from the sort of left-wing sociology professor politics that they've embraced for so long. But they're going to pretend that it's just a messaging problem, not an actual policy problem. They're going to slap some sort of ethnic face on the radicalism and hope that that works. This presumably is the logic of people like philanthropist Elizabeth Simons, who's the daughter of the late billionaire hedge fund investor Jamie Simons, who just donated $250,000 to the pro-Zoran Mamdani super PAC, New Yorkers for Lower Costs. So you've got these scions of billionaires who are giving money to ethnically diverse, wild leftists. Now, again, these are people who grew up in wealth who are now trying to, I assume, alleviate their socialistic guilt by giving money to, again, another scion of privilege and wealth, Zoran Mamdani, who pretends that what he's really about is the little people. Mamdani, of course, has said there should not be billionaires, but he is happy to take money from them, apparently. In just a moment, we will get to the Democratic Party, how they shifted from a party of sort of broader ideas to an ethnic solidarity party. It's not working for them. It's broken. Now, speaking of things that are broken, your cell phone, it's kind of broken because over time, the battery life fades, the processor can't keep up. It's fallen in the toilet, perhaps. Is that what you did? I know you did, didn't you? Fortunately, thanks to Pure Talk, your cell phone is something you can replace without feeling guilty. When you switch on over to Pure Talk this month, they're going to give you a Samsung Galaxy A36 for free with a $35 qualifying plan. Just $35 a month for talk, text, data, and free Samsung phone with scratch-resistant Gorilla Glass and a battery that lasts all day long. All on America's most dependable 5G network. That network is great, by the way. I go all over the country. I'm constantly traveling, and I'm constantly using Pure Talk for my calls. I value my calls. You value your calls. You should be using Pure Talk. Why? Well, you win by cutting your cell phone bill in half, and they win by hiring more Americans and helping more veterans. Make that switch in as little as 10 minutes. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Get your free phone today. Again, that's puretalk.com/Shapiro. Switch on over to my wireless company, America's wireless company, Pure Talk. Great network, great coverage, excellent phone. And again, you get that special deal. Go to puretalk.com/Shapiro. Get your free phone today. That's puretalk.com/Shapiro. Also, feeling safe, really, really important to me. I used to think that good locks and a loud alarm were enough. Well, then it turns out that real security is about preempting threats, preventing them in the first place. That's why I use Simply Safe for proactive protection that keeps our studio and employees secure before anything can happen. Most security systems only spring into action after someone's already broken in. By then, it's just too late. Simply Safe's new Active Guard outdoor protection actually stops break-ins before they happen. Their AI-powered cameras work with live monitoring agents who can spot suspicious activity around your property in real time. If someone's lurking where they shouldn't be, agents can talk directly to them, flip on spotlights, call police if needed, all before anything happens to your home. There are no contracts or hidden fees to worry about. It's easy to see why over 4 million Americans trust Simply Safe. CNET named it the best home security system of 2025. Newsweek and USA Today ranked them #1 for customer service. Plus, monitoring plans start at around $1 a day. They back it all up with a 60-day money-back guarantee. We love Simply Safe here at the office. It means that, when we leave for the evening, we come back in the morning, our cameras are still here. Visit simplysafe.com/Shapiro. Claim 50% off a new system. With a professional monitoring plan, get your first month for free. That's simplysafe.com/Shapiro. There's no safe like Simply Safe. Meanwhile, again, the goal for the Democratic Party is to continue to say radical things, but apparently they believe that ethnic identity and ethnic solidarity are more important than actual ideas. And so you have Mayor Karen Bass, who's out there calling the homeless in Los Angeles unhoused Angelinos. But of course, she's a member of an ethnic minority, and therefore, what? This sounds better coming from her than it would coming from an upper-class white liberal lady? It doesn't, by the way, to the residents of Los Angeles.
The Weather Service has issued the extreme heat warning in the region beginning Thursday through Saturday, with temperatures expected to reach as high as 108 in the San Fernando Valley. These temperatures could be dangerous, especially for our most vulnerable residents, children, pets, people who work outside, unhoused Angelinos, and those with certain health conditions.
Unhoused Angelinos. I mean, this is the kind of radicalism Democrats have continued to embrace. Or how about Democratic Representative Delia Ramirez from Illinois? She actually makes the claim that deporting illegal immigrants is unconstitutional, which is insane, of course.
What is happening right now under the Department of Homeland Security is unconstitutional. It is actually unaccountable, and it's against the law.
Okay, well, again, this sort of radicalism does not play. These are luxury beliefs, as Rob Henderson has suggested. So what are Democrats going to do? Well, if they're smart, what they're going to do is they're going to campaign among the base as radicals, and then they're going to swivel toward the middle in terms of policy. And that seems to be the approach of Gavin Newsom. Gavin Newsom is an incredibly calculating politician. Again, I think that his affect is quite smarmy. I think that when it comes to the way that he presents to the world, it is lizard person. However, what he's doing right now is smart. he is trying to present as radical to his base while going to donors and saying, actually, I'm kind of a political moderate. Which, again, that's a smart play. So what has he been doing? Well, he's been posturing, mostly. Apparently, he's determined to troll his way to the top of social media simply by ripping on President Trump. He understands that for the Democratic base, the thing that matters most is yelling at Trump. It's not policy. It's not trans issues. It's yelling at Trump. According to Politico, with an inescapable smash mouth, all caps laden meme-filled X account, California Governor Gavin Newsom is holding a mirror up to MAGA, and MAGA doesn't like what it sees. There's Newsom on Mount Rushmore. There's Newsom getting prayed over by Tucker Carlson, Kid Rock, and an angelic winged Hulk Hogan. There's Newsom posting in all caps saying his mid-cycle redistricting proposal has led many people to call him Gavin Christopher Columbus Newsom because of the maps. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So Steve Bannon, who of course is always quoted by the media. You can always count on Steve to find his way into a political article. For somebody who supposedly despises the legacy media, that dude gets quoted by the legacy media routinely. He is on speed dial for them. Quote, he's trying to mimic President Trump. He's no Trump, but if you look at the Democratic Party, he's at least getting up there, and he's trying to imitate a Trumpian vision of fighting, right? He looks like the only person in the Democratic Party who is organizing a fight that they feel they can win. Michelle Obama famously advised Democrats to live by a dictum, when they go low, we go high. Newsom has approached it a bit differently. When they go low, we go low, and, backed by lots of AI-generated slop, end up high in the algorithm. So Gavin Newsom was asked about this, actually, and he explains why he shifted tactics from going high to going low.
I think it connects here in LA and the fires. And how he was completely misrepresenting the facts, misinformation, disinformation. Elon Musk was piling on as well.
You were really angry that
yes.
he spoke to you then. And
No, I just,
angry
because I've never seen anything like it. In the middle of emergency, all the lies, all the misrepresentations, all the untruths, and they became gospel and they were spread around the world. And it was a big wake-up call. And we got back on our feet and we got back on the offense. And then when the National Guard was federalized, what the hell is going on? You saw ICE out here today. You know what that is? That is a preview for things to come. Mark my word. I said this a couple months ago with the National Guard. I said that was a preview for the rest of the country. That's exactly what happened in Washington, D.C. So yes, I've changed. The facts have changed. We need to change. And we need to stand up to this authoritarian. We need to stand up at this moment. It is foundational. Again, it is not about Republican versus Democrat. This guy is an invasive species. He's completely different.
Trump is an invasive species, he says, and he's doing all the hand motions to show you how invasive President Trump is. It's pretty wild. He's doing some really good mime hands there. He's trapped in the glass box, but talking about politics. In any case, Gavin Newsom is, again, doing this performative nonsense for the Democratic base, hoping it's going to jazz up the Democratic base, and then watch. He's going to swivel in the actual election to a supposed moderation in policy. It's why, with his other hand, he's been doing interviews with right-wing influencers in an attempt to pose as moderate. Again, this is smart. I'm not sure it's going to work because it's really inauthentic, but it is smart. And it is a recognition for the Democrats that they do have a problem with the broader American public. Their base wants Zohran Mamdani. The rest of the American public does not. As I pointed out in the last election cycle, over and over and over again, Donald Trump seized the middle ground on every single issue, ranging from entitlements to foreign policy. He seized the middle ground on issues like social issues, like abortion and trans. And Democrats simply gave it away. Well, they're going to have to move back toward the middle on policy, but they're first going to have to pose a lot. They're going to have to do a lot of revolutionary posing. And that is what Gavin Newsom has been doing in some pretty awkward ways, honestly. But it's the best Democrats have at this point. One manifestation of that yesterday, Beyond Inc., which is the company that owns Bed Bath & Beyond, put out a statement from Marcus Lemonis, who's the executive chairman of Bed Bath & Beyond. So Bed Bath & Beyond used to be a giant chain. They started losing money. They had to close a lot of their shops. They went bankrupt. I remember my wife and I used to go to a Bed Bath & Beyond pretty regularly. It was located, I believe, at the corner of Ventura and Whitsett, if I recall correctly. In any case, their new statement is, quote, "We will not open or operate retail stores in California. This decision isn't about politics. It's about reality. California has created one of the most overregulated, expensive, and risky environments for businesses in America. It's a system that makes it harder to employ people, harder to keep doors open, harder to deliver values to customers. The result? Higher taxes, higher fees, higher wages that many businesses simply cannot sustain, and endless regulations that strangle growth. Even when the state announced a budget surplus, it's built on the backs of ordinary citizens who are paying too much and businesses who are squeezed until they break. At Bed Bath & Beyond, our responsibility is to our customers and our shareholders. We will not participate in a system that undermines both. Instead, we are investing in a California strategy that works. 24 to 48-hour delivery, and in many cases, same-day service. Californians will continue to get the products they love through bedbathandbeyond.com, but without the inflated costs created by an unsustainable business model. We're taking a stand because it's time for common sense. Businesses deserve the chance to succeed. That's why Bed Bath & Beyond will serve California customers directly through their website on our terms with their best interests at heart. Now, they are reopening stores in places like Nashville. So how does Gavin Newsom respond to that? Because that's obviously a rip on his garbage business environment, which it is a garbage business environment. We literally took our company, Daily Wire, from California to Nashville and Florida in order to have a better business environment. So I know exactly what Bed Bath & Beyond is talking about. So what was Newsom's response? It was trollery, of course. He tweeted out, the company that already went bankrupt and closed every store across the country 2 years ago? Okay. And then his press office, which is where he does most of his trolling, put out a statement, quote, after their bankruptcy and closure of every store, like most Americans, we thought Bed Bath & Beyond no longer existed. We wish them well in their efforts to become relevant again as they try to open a second store. Okay, so, just ridiculous. I mean, I'm sorry, just ridiculous. You were one of the factors leading to them having to close stores, and now you're celebrating that they're not opening stores in California. So Marcus Lemonis then responded, quote, Dear Governor Gavin Newsom, I thought that your post would suggest we bring business leaders together to understand how to improve the 4 pillars friction of business and find a way to make it better. 1, streamline regulation, consistent, simplified compliance rules across state and local levels. 2, balanced labor environment that's good for employees and employers. 3, litigation reform, reducing abusive lawsuits while keeping protection for workers. 4, competitive tax and cost structure, incentives to come as opposed to disincentives to lead. Also, we bought the IP over 2 years ago and have built bedbathandbeyond.com into a $1 billion online business. We'll target opening 300 small to mid-sized neighborhood stores through our Kirkland's investment. You are a smart man. I know the post below is out of frustration. Okay, but again, Gavin Newsom is not interested in doing business with Bed Bath & Beyond. He's interested in the trollery that he thinks is going to lift him to the 2028 nomination. According to Amy Parnas, writing for The Hill, Newsom has taken a page from Trump's playbook, mirroring everything from the president's rants to his social media habits. In recent days, the California governor has touted his own beautiful midterm redistricting proposal and his beautiful rally to boot, needling Trump's braggadocious ways. Newsom has started to write his social media posts in all caps, just like the president, and he's come up with his own Trumpy nickname for the president, Taco, short for Trump always chickens out, an acronym that originated on Wall Street in reaction to President Trump's moves on tariffs and is designed to annoy the White House. And meanwhile, Democrats are really, really happy about that. Because again, the idea, it's funny, whenever a party loses, the idea seems to be from the party that they don't have to shift positionally. It's all about the attitude that if you're just stronger and the resistance is stronger, then you're going to, if only you had more passion, then you'd win. Well, if you are losing in secular fashion across the country, perhaps the reason for that is because your policies are unpopular across the country. But Democrats, again, they're more interested in the excitement than they are in the actual political change. Maybe at the end of this, after he wins the nomination or something, Newsom shifts to the middle in an attempt to win a general. Maybe. But right now, that's not what Democrats are excited about. That's not going to get their voter registration numbers up. But again, I think they are waiting for some sort of white knight to save them here. Eric Swalwell, last seen with Chinese spy Fang Fang, he says that he loves it. He's super into it.
I freaking love what Governor Newsom is doing because that's what offense looks like. And we don't see enough Democrats, frankly, doing that. We have to be in more spaces, more places. And always on to voters means always honest. And Donald Trump, for all of his warts and all of his corruption and incompetency, he's always on. And so when he makes a mistake, he is on an hour later, 2 hours later, 3 hours later, and it diminishes how the public views him. If we were always on with our ideas and our values, it will project authenticity and who we really are. And so you're seeing Governor Newsom, I think, most effectively do that.
Again, the key word for them is they're trying to be authentic. Now, the problem for them is that Newsom is very, very inauthentic. Just as a personality, very, very inauthentic person. And so I think that's going to bleed through eventually. But Democrats are going to continue to push the idea that radicalism equals authenticity. Molly Jong-Fast, I don't know why you would use her on MSNBC as sort of the political guru. But Molly Jong-Fast, in both of her hair colors, say that we need more Zohran Mamdanis and AOCs in the Democratic Party.
Voters want really their electeds to fight for that.
Do Democrats feel betrayed by their elected leaders?
I think those what those polling numbers are saying. But that's to say, but you know, like people like Sherrod Brown jumped into the race, raised $3 million in 24 hours. Like there is support there. The question is, it's only going to be for people who really feel authentic, right?
Sherrod's never been afraid of his shadow.
Exactly.
He's always spoken his mind.
Chris Murphy, Sherrod Brown, Mondami, these people, AOC, they're not all exactly the same politically, but they are the same in the fact that they're brave and they break through.
Okay, so, it's going to be fascinating to see if the Democratic Party can somehow recover from this death spiral that it is in. The first thing they need to do is abandon their racialist approach to American politics. It has been a disaster for them. Again, the Democratic Party took the wrong path in 2012. When Barack Obama won re-election, he won in 2008 in his original election based on the idea that all Americans ought to be treated similar. No white Americans, no black Americans, just Americans. No red Americans, blue Americans, just Americans. We're all Americans. And then by 2012, it was, we're black Americans. And we have some interests. And then we're gay Americans. They have some interests. Latino Americans we'll give each of you something from the goodie jar. And then we'll have a coalition. And that was the basic idea of 2012. And then he won. And the Democratic Party ever since has been unable to shake the belief that demographically they were going to win if they just kept appealing to growing minorities in the United States. And then President Trump came along, and it turns out that none of that held. Now, we should have known that that wasn't going to hold forever because demographics are not, in fact, destiny in the United States. Huge blocks of ethnic voters have moved from one party to the other over time. Blacks used to be Republicans in the early 20th century. Then they moved over to the Democratic Party during the FDR tenure, and then even further during the 1960s. You saw the same thing happen with Irish voters, German voters, Italian voters, Jewish voters, actually. You've seen massive shifts based on the politics of the various parties. Ethnic voters don't vote as blocks typically. They vote over time as individuals. The most important thing in this respect has been the shift in the Latino vote that happened over the course of the last couple of election cycles toward President Trump. Can Democrats shake the idea that simply by making ethnic appeals they will win? I don't know if they can. I don't know. It's a real problem for them. The first thing they're going to have to shake if they want to do that is the sort of inside the beltway luxury belief culture that they have cultivated. And that means, for example, that they should probably let go of the idea that fighting crime is somehow bad. Already coming up, the Trump administration is just owning the libs when it comes to the crime issue. But in other news, here's the reality. You're not getting enough fiber. I know it seems like a non sequitur because it is, because it's just that important. You aren't getting your fruits and veggies. I know you're not because you'd have to down, basically a grocery cart filled with fruits and veggies every single day. And that's why I started trying Balance of Nature supplements. These aren't some artificial knockoff trying to mimic what nature provides. They simply let nature do its job. We're talking about 47 real ingredients: mango, wild blueberries, spinach, kale, shiitake mushrooms, broccoli, the works. Plus, their fiber and spice blend is also unique. It combines 4 whole fibers like psyllium husk and flaxseed with 12 aromatic spices, including turmeric and cinnamon. You won't find another supplement that does this. I also appreciate there are no artificial additives and no added sugars, just clean ingredients that are vegan, kosher certified by the OU, gluten-free. You can even mix that powder into smoothies or sprinkle it over food. No bags, no mess, no measuring. Whenever I'm traveling, this becomes pretty much indispensable. After years of research and development, they've created something that makes getting proper nutrition actually convenient. Go to balanceofnature.com, use promo code Shapiro for 35% off your first order as a preferred customer. Plus, get that free bottle of fiber and spice. That's balanceofnature.com, promo code Shapiro. Also, whenever I'm on the road, I'm talking about that a lot because I have a book coming out. One of the things that I'm dreading about being on the road, aside from the obvious, is I don't have my Helix Sleep mattress because you go to the hotel, whatever mattress they got, nice, not so nice, it wasn't made just for me. Helix Sleep did make a mattress for me, and it's been transformative for my sleep quality. Now, I easily fall asleep in minutes, even when current news stories are demanding my attention. What makes Helix different is they don't just sell you a random mattress. They actually match you with the perfect mattress for your body and sleep style. Whether you're a side sleeper, back sleeper, somewhere in between, they have you covered. They make it so simple to get your best night's sleep every single night. All you have to do is take that sleep quiz, get matched with a custom mattress based on your body type and sleep preferences. Trust me, when you find that right match, you'll wonder how you ever slept on anything else. I have a firm but breathable mattress. It's made just for me, which means, I sleep better on it. Right now, Helix is offering an incredible Labor Day early access sale. Visit helixsleep.com/Ben. Get 20% off site-wide. That's helixsleep.com/Ben for 20% off site-wide. Make sure you enter our show name after checkout so they know we sent you. Again, just visit helixsleep.com/Ben to get that exclusive offer. That's helixsleep.com/Ben to get 20% off site-wide. So yesterday, there was a situation in which a bunch of members of the Trump administration headed on down to Shake Shack inside Union Station in order to presumably get lunch. Now, let's be clear what's going on here. The reason the vice president decides to go to Shake Shack is because they know the protesters are there. Okay, this is not like this idea that suddenly the VP and the defense secretary and the White House deputy chief of staff all decide to go out for lunch at Shake Shack, of all places, in Union Station. They went there because they wanted to be heckled, because they knew it would be a good photo. And you know what? Good for them. Because the more you can demonstrate that the left has these luxury beliefs where fighting crime is somehow bad, the more you can demonstrate they're out of touch with ordinary people. According to the Wall Street Journal, as these three members of the Trump administration met with National Guard personnel, they were at times drowned out by nearby protesters who shouted, "Free DC." Miller said, "We're going to ignore these stupid white hippies who all need to go home and take a nap." Here was Miller going off. Stephen Miller he does not pull punches. That much can be said for Stephen.
We are not going to let the communists destroy a great American city, let alone the nation's capital. And let's just also address one other thing. All these demonstrators that you've seen out here in recent days, all of these elderly white hippies, they're not part of the city and never have been. And by the way, most of the citizens who live in Washington, D.C. are black. This is not a city that has had any safety for its black citizens for generations. And President Trump is the one who is fixing that with the support of the Metropolitan Police Department, the support of the National Guard, and our federal law enforcement officers.
Okay, so he wasn't the only person who spoke here. J.D. Vance, the vice president, also took the opportunity to talk about the people who were yelling at them.
We hear these people outside screaming, "Free D.C." Let's free D.C. from lawlessness. Let's free Washington, D.C. from one of the highest murder rates in the entire world. Let's free Washington, D.C. so that young families can walk around and feel safe and secure. That's what we're trying to free D.C. from. And as Stephen said, it's kind of bizarre that we have a bunch of old, primarily white people who are out there protesting the policies that keep people safe when they've never felt danger in their entire lives.
Now, notice again, the multiracial appeal that J.D. Vance is making there. He is saying it's a bunch of older white people with luxury beliefs who are out there shouting about freeing Washington, D.C. And of course, he is not wrong about that. Yeah, he is correct. He also says that it's rather shameful that people are afraid to walk around Washington, D.C. thanks to the crime.
This is the national, cultural, and political capital of the world's greatest nation. And you talk to people, black, brown, white, so many of them are afraid to bring their kids into its public spaces. It's a shame. It's a blight. It actually should make every American ashamed that the world's leading superpower, our national capital, was unsafe for families to walk around at night. That is a disgrace. We don't think that it's acceptable. And thank God we have the presidential leadership to change it. And that's exactly what we're trying to do.
Now, I mean, we can't actually try to count all the white people in the protests. We have some footage of the crowd that was booing Vance and Hegseth as they entered D.C.'s Union Station to not just get lunch, by the way, go visit the National Guard troops over there. Here's what the video looked like. So you can see, here comes Vance. Here comes Hegseth. And that is indeed a lot of old white people. Some reporters, a lot of white people doing a lot of yelling. In fact, the only black person I see in this entire picture is the cameraman. So, yeah. I mean, again, if the Democratic Party's idea is old white people scream at J.D. Vance or Donald Trump or Pete Hegseth, good luck to you. Now, it is worth noting that the Democratic Party has basically decided that resistance to Trump is more important than actually solving problems. There's polling on what Trump is doing in D.C. And according to the Washington Post, Washington, D.C. residents overwhelmingly oppose President Trump's decision to take over the D.C. police and order federal law enforcement and the National Guard onto district streets. 65% don't think his actions will make the city safer from violent crime, according to a Washington Post Char School poll. 31% of district residents say crime is an extremely or very serious problem in the city. That's down from 50% in May and 65% in spring of 2024. Presumably, that's because some people are coding that question as, do you approve of what Trump is doing about crime? Now, residents do show agreement on only one view. Just under half think increasing punishments for convicted teenagers would reduce violent crime, which is a President Trump policy aim, obviously. So again, it is fascinating. In Washington, D.C., it is certainly true that the politically driven are less interested in solving problems than in yelling at President Trump. For sure, for sure. According to the polling, by the way, as of August 17th, 54% of D.C. residents who are polled here say that crime is getting better in D.C. 17% say worse. If you go back to just May, 29% said better and 28% said worse. As far as how many people were worried about being victims of various crimes in their day-to-day life, the answer is 39% were worried about being carjacked, 43% were worried about a theft in a public place, 36% were worried about physical assault. Those are actually very, very high numbers, like truly high numbers. In most of the country, the answer is very low. Asked whether people that they knew had been victims of particular violent crimes, 27% said yes, that someone they knew, a close friend, had been a victim of violent crime. Another 14% said a member of their immediate family. 10% said they themselves had been a victim of violent crime in Washington, D.C. And it is true that the National Guard soldiers are certainly more visible. According to that polling, 55% of the people polled said that they have seen and noticed federal law enforcement officers in Washington, D.C. But 61% said it's made them feel less safe, which is just a lie. I'm sorry. That is people using that question as a proxy for, do you approve of President Trump or do you not approve of President Trump? And now, again, you can take the hatred of President Trump as your guiding star if you're a Democrat. You can. Is that going to solve the underlying problems that are causing more and more people to register Republican? The answer is no. Listen, D.C. is never going to vote Republican. With that said, the Democratic Party voter registration problem is present in places like Washington, D.C. They're not going to lose the city, but they certainly could lose parts of the city in terms of the demographics to President Trump. And it is amazing that Democrats in the city refuse to actually solve their problems instead of just yelling at President Trump. Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser was asked about crime stat manipulation in D.C. And she says, don't worry. We're not manipulating. The crime stats are going down.
Thank you, Mayor. The suspicion of manipulating numbers is not new. In 2018, Fox 5 also reported on similar accusation, going through several FOIA requests and a lot of data as well. My question to you is, what's the plan here? How do you show the federal government that you're on tap and on top of and able to respond to what's going on?
I think we can respond pretty simply. I'm not sure yet what questions we've gotten, so I'll just leave it as saying that we will cooperate and answer their questions.
Okay, so again, they're just going to continue, I assume, to falsify those crime stats. Meanwhile, because of the resistance to Trump, and this explains everything that Gavin Newsom is doing, he thinks he's going to win voters like this. Apparently, you remember just last week, there was that rather girly throwing person in the polo shirt who chucked a hoagie at one of the National Guard soldiers, and then got his ass arrested. And it turns out he worked for the DOJ and, now got fired. Well, now, apparently, the sandwich has become a sign of resistance. By the way, this is just a demonstration of a totally unserious country. When throwing a sandwich at a National Guard officer, is it like in actual countries with actual tyranny, signs of resistance involve standing in front of tanks in Tiananmen Square, for example. In unserious countries, signs of resistance involve throwing a hoagie at a National Guard member and then getting out on bail. But according to 51st, which is a DC-centric website, like almost everyone else, Lorraine Hughes saw the footage as it rocketed across social media last week. A man clad in shorts and a pink shirt angrily gesticulating in front of a federal officer on U Street Northwest before throwing an uneaten sub sandwich at his chest. A brief chase ensues and the man, known by the internet as Sandwich Guy, is apprehended. Inspiration quickly struck for the hobbyist printmaker. She started carving a design into a linoleum block, rolled red paint along the elevated edges, and pressed the block into a piece of paper. I love the DC flag. It's an awesome, clean design, she said. Something about the sub fitting right in for the bars seemed like a good substitute. Who posted a picture of the resulting print on the Reddit channel for Washington, D.C. It prompted thousands of likes and requests for copies of the print. She spent the weekend furiously taking orders for pins, tote bags, and t-shirts bearing the new design. First of all, capitalism always wins, gang. She said, I realize sub-sandwich art is a very specific cultural moment. But again, this has become like the rallying point. So basically, Gavin Newsom is Sandwich Guy. I assume he throws better than Sandwich Guy. But it is demonstrative of where the left is. Basically, they are now relegated to throwing sandwiches at people in the desperate hope that this will win them back political popularity. Now, there are only a couple of things that can win them back political popularity. One of them would be shifting their position, which it seems like they're not going to do. The other could be an economic downturn. I keep warning about this because, again, political policy makes an awful big difference. I do not like corporatism. I do not like unpredictable tariffs. I am concerned. I think the economy continues to sort of froth and bubble. But to more on this in just a moment. First, when we started the Daily Wire, we did it to bring truth to America without that leftist bent. And then, after Harry's Razors pulled their advertising from us for saying that boys are boys and girls are girls, and not that boys can be girls or anything, we launched Jeremy's Razors to be the sole company in the industry to deliver a great shave that isn't afraid of biological reality. Well, right now, you can try Jeremy's Razors for just $7.99. And behold, I have for your perusal this. It is indeed a razor. Barber-grade blades, a moisturizing aloe strip, a weighted handle, and a damn good shave. Only $7.99. It's our lowest price ever. Join the hundreds of thousands of Daily Wire listeners who use Jeremy's Razors. Go to jeremy'srazors.com/Ben today. Join the fight for sanity. That's jeremy'srazors.com/Ben. Also, quick question. Do you have the Daily Wire Plus app on your phone or TV? If not, you should, because when you tap follow under my picture, you'll get notified the second I go live or drop a new episode. Need to step away? No problem. You can jump right back in where you left off. If you want something fast, watch my shorts, the clips everybody's sharing on social media right there on the app. And with the Explore tab, every show, every episode is all in one easy-to-find place. This is where our community actually lives, chatting live during shows, sharing ideas, debating big questions. And since it's our app, we can't be canceled, filtered, censored. Don't just listen. Join us. Download the Daily Wire Plus app now in the App Store, Google Play, Roku, Samsung, and more. Speaking of the radicalism in the Democratic Party, again, a Gavin Newsom sort of take here is the redistricting in California in violation of the California Constitution. Now he's trying to get a referendum passed in November that will allow for a one-time redistricting in response to Texas Republicans redistricting. And again, notice the racialist sort of tenor of so much of this. Democratic Representative Aguilar, California 33rd. He's arguing that California, Pete Aguilar, the Democratic caucus chair, he's arguing that California needs to redistrict. Why? Because California is helping minorities, whereas Texas is somehow harming minorities by creating, I think, more majority Hispanic districts.
This is a temporary measure to answer what Donald Trump is trying to do across this country. It is temporary. And it is considerate of the Voting Rights Act, which is something that Texas does not care about. They are splitting communities of color. We are doing everything we can in this map to lift up those communities of interest and protect the Voting Rights Act. We honor and lift that work up.
Again, it is amazing. So if Texas redistricts, it's harming minorities. If California redistricts, it's somehow helping minorities. First of all, I was unaware that one man, one vote is supposed to not apply based on your race. That I think it's precisely the opposite, actually. But again, this is the idea that is being promoted by Democrats across the aisle, all across the spectrum. Eddie Glaude of MSNBC, he says redistricting in Texas is somehow racist.
4.3 million black people live in Texas, the largest number of black folk in any state, in any country, in the union. And look at that districting map. How are their voices going to be represented? So I want us to understand what we're seeing not only in Texas, but around the country as a part of racial gerrymandering, as part of the racialist and racist agenda of the Trump administration. I know we want to talk about it simply in terms of politics, but there's something insidious underneath it all.
And by the way, look how they cannot get out of their own way. Look how, as the New York Times mentioned, you cannot use race as a proxy for voting anymore. You can't. And the Democrats keep doing it. They're using race as a proxy for how you should draw the voting districts because they believe that they can draw districts simply based on the race of the people in them and that will somehow guarantee a Democratic win or a Republican win in a particular district. That isn't true. Meanwhile, Barack Obama underscoring his own radicalism. So President Obama has been speaking out a lot more lately. That is presumably because his party is on the skids. And it turns out the Obama movement was a giant fail. Everything that has happened since Barack Obama became president in 2008 has not been good for the country. It has not. Barack Obama is, I think, the single most transformative president of my lifetime in the negative direction. Now, President Trump may end up being the most transformative president in my lifetime in the other direction, but that too is a reaction to the excesses of Barack Obama. The idea that Barack Obama is somehow still touted as a bizarre Democratic moderate is beyond speech. It's so stupid. If you remember back to the Obama era, Barack Obama was a radical left-winger in the Senate. He was a radical left-winger as president. It's the reason he was unpopular going into 2012. And then he was even more radical in his second term. He set the predicate for all of this. I'm just going to pick up my pen and pick up my phone. I don't need Congress. He's going to unilaterally just do things. It was Barack Obama who set all the groundwork for all of this. Well, now he is greenlighting the California redistricting effort. He says, I wanted just a fair fight between Republicans and Democrats based on who's got better ideas and take it to the voters and see what happens. But I want to be very clear. He always wants to be very clear. Here from Texas is taking direction from a partisan White House. I love that Barack Obama is now suggesting that Donald Trump was the head of a partisan White House. Barack Obama's IRS literally targeted conservative nonprofits. Barack Obama's regime legitimately went after the Little Sisters of the Poor. He went after nuns to get them to subsidize abortion care. Barack Obama suggesting that he was somehow a nonpartisan president is insane. Anyway, he says, given that Texas is taking direction from a partisan White House, that is effectively saying gerrymander for partisan purposes so we can maintain the House despite our unpopular policies. Ridiculous right in the middle of a decade between censuses, which is not how the system was designed. I have tremendous respect for how Governor Gavin Newsom has approached this. I have a feeling that he could find a way to justify any redistricting by any Democrats at any time, actually. I don't believe him when he says that that's only a response to Texas. If California decided to redistrict to stop Trump's agenda just on its own, he would do that as well. But for the Democrats, again, you can see Gavin Newsom taking advantage of all of this. Is it going to be successful? I don't know. It might not be in the state of California. Even if it is he going to be able to reverse the fact that demographics are cutting against Democrats, that voter registration is cutting against Democrats? No. But all Gavin Newsom wants out of this is the 2028 nomination. And what does that mean? It means performative resistance. And it means a lot of cursing. Here we go.
This is radical rigging of a midterm election. Radical rigging of an election. Destroying, vandalizing this democracy, the rule of law. So I'm sorry. I know some people's sensibilities. I respect and appreciate that. But right now, with all due respect, we're walking down a damn different path. We're fighting fire with fire, and we're going to punch these sons of bitches in the mouth.
So much verbal grind. It's like a teenage girl in a man's body. I'm going to punch these. Take a lozenge, my friend. And meanwhile, as I've said before, the biggest obstacle to continued Republican success is not, in fact, President Trump's immigration policy or his crime policy or his foreign policy, all of which are excellent. The biggest obstacle is the possibility of an economic downturn. And as I've said 1,000 times, what do investors want from the Trump administration? What do they want? They only want a few things. Deregulation. We're doing that. Lower taxes. We're doing that. Predictability. We're not doing that at all. Every investor I know is kind of holding his or her breath, waiting to see what President Trump is going to do on a day-to-day basis. And that's also true when it comes to the Fed. So there's a widespread sentiment that the Federal Reserve is very likely to lower the interest rates 25 basis points at their upcoming meeting. And that's probably what needs to happen, given the fact that inflation has really not popped in the way that many people thought that it would immediately after the tariffs. Now, it's also possible that there will be some inflation that bleeds into the economy, but even if that were true, the kind of inflation that's being produced by tariffs tends to be transitory. Why? Well, because if you temporarily increase the prices of goods and services through tariffs, then demand lowers. And when demand lowers, then the prices go back down. Now, that does mean more economic stagnation. And theoretically, you can counteract some of that by subsidizing easy money policies via the Fed, which I think is what President Trump is calling for at this point. However, there was apparently broad Federal Reserve support for keeping those interest rates steady last month. According to the minutes from last month's meeting, almost all officials supported the decision, implying that apart from 2 dissenting officials, it was backed by the remaining 16 officials who participated. According to the Wall Street Journal, the decision followed a period of intense political pressure on Fed Chair Jerome Powell by the White House to lower interest rates. Officials maintained their benchmark policy rate in a range between 4.25% and 4.5% as they weighed how importers, retailers, and consumers will split the cost of higher duties on imports. The written accounts of the meeting, released with a customary 3-week lag, suggested officials were divided over when they could be confident higher import costs wouldn't lead to a period of broader rolling price hikes. Some officials said a great deal could be learned in coming months. Others said it would not be feasible or appropriate to wait for complete clarity on the tariff's effects on inflation before adjusting the stance of monetary policy. Now, again, there are a lot of people who are suspicious that Fed Chair Jerome Powell has basically now staked his own political reputation on saying no to Trump. That includes people, by the way, who are not on the right side of the aisle politically. People like Mohammed El-Arian of Allianz. He has suggested that Jerome Powell needs to go simply because of the sort of patina of politics that now resides and hovers over Jerome Powell. Since that meeting, economic data have strengthened the argument of so-called doves who favor rate cuts because job growth in May and June was revised lower. Governors Christopher Waller and Michelle Bowman, who last month dissented in favor of a cut, have argued officials shouldn't react to price increase from tariffs because those aren't likely to be repeated. That is the argument I was making, which is that these inflation arguments are transitory. Now, again, I have to say that I think central bank-driven artificially low interest rates tend to lead to bubbles. This is what happened during the Greenspan years and then happened again during the Jerome Powell early years. Easy money policies tend to lead to bubbles. We already have an extremely high PE ratio on Wall Street that is particularly driven by the insane, out-of-whack price-to-earnings ratios of the big tech companies, which are now trading at in some cases, over 100 times price-to-earnings. So you really need to have an earnings ramp-up to justify that sort of investment. So I'm suspicious that we are already in a bubble. I know that a lot of people are hesitant to say that. I know there's a lot of cross currents in the economy right now, a lot of confusion in the economy. But if you look at how the stock market is going right now, what you are seeing is that investors are pouring money into the tech companies because they look scalable, and they are not pouring money into any other part of the stock market. Well, why does this matter? Well, what you want from the Federal Reserve, when I talked about predictability, what you want from the Federal Reserve is a feeling that they are, in fact, dispassionate, that they are going to look at all the economic factors and then make the best decision for the future of the economy. What you don't want is the feeling that a president who is, in fact, quite variable on his economic policies is actually manipulating the Fed or pressuring the Fed into doing things. Now, we saw already the president fire the head of the Bureau of Labor Statistics because he didn't like the last jobs report. And as I said at the time, I thought that was a negative. I didn't think there was a real upside to that. Why? Well, because the head of the BLS just takes in the stats and then churns out whatever the outcome of the stats is. You can argue with the methodologies that are used. You can change those methodologies, but you're not going to simply fix the jobs numbers by replacing the person at the head of the BLS. And all that's going to do is underscore the idea that now the data that you're going to get are actually being pushed by the Trump administration, particularly. I'm not in favor of that. Well, meanwhile, the president has been exerting pretty open pressure, not just on Jerome Powell, but now on another member of the Federal Reserve, Governor Lisa Cook. Now, I may not agree with Lisa Cook on economics. In fact, I probably don't. I may think that Lisa Cook tends to be politically left. Okay, that does not change the reality for investors, which is the more perception there is that the central government of the United States is pressuring the Federal Reserve in one direction or another, the less certainty there is going to be that the Federal Reserve central banking policy of the United States is geared toward most sane outcome rather than most politically palatable outcome for the administration. According to Axios, the Trump administration is pursuing wholesale changes at the Federal Reserve with a ruthlessness and creativity few Fed watchers could have imagined. The president's demands for lower interest rates are not just rhetoric. His attacks aren't limited to the insults against Chair Jerome Powell. Rather, the administration is pursuing a sophisticated multi-front war to try to install loyalists atop the Fed much faster than normal turnover would allow. Now, remember, the way that it works over at the Federal Reserve, it's not that Jerome Powell unilaterally gets to make a decision about what the interest rates are. He is not a one-man show over there. The way that it works is that there's something called the Federal Open Markets Committee. And the Federal Open Markets Committee decides exactly how this goes. It consists of 12 members, the 7 members of the Board of Governors, the president of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and 4 of the remaining 11 Reserve Bank presidents who serve one-year terms on a rotating basis. So the current 2025 committee members include Jerome Powell. It does include Lisa Cook. It also includes people like Chris Waller, who is on Trump's side in the last debate. Now, as for Cook, she was a professor of economics and international relations at Michigan State University. She was a research associate at one point at the National Bureau of Economic Research. She was at the faculty at Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. But again, she leans left. She was a senior economist on the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama. So there's a reason why President Trump wants her gone, I would assume. With that said, is that going to be enough? I mean, if the idea is that Trump is going to radically remake the FOMC to back his economic priors, that is not going to make investors sort of more eager to invest is going to make them less eager, because what they will figure is that the president of the United States is pushing people into doing things they wouldn't otherwise do. Bill Pulte is the director of the Federal Housing Finance Agency. He posted on X a letter to the Attorney General stating it appears Lisa Cook, quote, has falsified bank documents and property records to acquire more favorable loan terms, potentially committing mortgage fraud under the criminal statutes. She took out a mortgage on a Michigan house represented to be her principal residence, and then shortly thereafter, she took out a loan on an Atlanta condominium that was also described as her principal residence, according to Pulte's letter. Now, she hasn't actually defaulted on either loan, actually, and Pulte has been going after both California Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James on similar grounds. Well, now President Trump is posting that Cook must resign, and apparently the Wall Street Journal is reporting he's considering firing Cook for cause. So he has a nominee who's going to be up, Stephen Moran, who would join Michelle Bowman and Christopher Waller as Trump appointees on the 7-person board of governors. With another vacancy, Trump appointees would then attain a 4-3 majority, and that would give Trump appointees power over the Fed system's budget, staffing, and selection of Reserve Bank presidents. So it could rig the system for the next couple of years. Right now, Cook's term is not scheduled to expire until 2038, which is extremely long. By the way, the Board of Governors has to vote to approve reappointment of everybody who is on a 5-year term, because the 12 presidents of the Reserve Bank serve 5-year terms. They're all scheduled to expire at the end of February. So theoretically, if President Trump were able to gain a 4-3 majority on the Board of Governors, he could then stack the FOMC just a few months from now in February. Now, is this likely? Maybe he'll get the rate cuts that he wants out of that. Let's assume that Trump gets best of all possibilities for him. He gets the rate cuts that he wants, big rate cuts. We go all the way down to, interest rates in the 3s, for example. We get like real cuts. We're all the way down to 2.75. Okay, are investors going to simply bet that the economy booms based on that, or are we just going to get gigantic bubbles? This is the problem with central bank policy. As a general rule, I'm more in favor of floating interest rates without the central bank setting these sorts of rules. Great book called The Price of Time, all about interest rates, that suggests that actually artificially low interest rates are just as damaging as very, very high interest rates in their own way. They lead to this delay effect where the bubble bursts and then everybody pays the price. According to the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, this is nasty business. Jerome Powell does not have the authority to remove Ms. Cook. Why would he know anything about her mortgages? The context for Mr. Pulte's accusations is relevant. President Trump is angry the Fed hasn't cut interest rates. Cook voted with Powell to stand pat at last month's meeting of the Federal Open Market Committee. So the Trump administration is trying to bludgeon Cook into supporting a rate cut under threat of removal and criminal prosecution. The FHFA's job under Pulte is to ensure Fannie and Freddie don't take on too much risk so taxpayers don't have to bail them out again, as happened between 2008 and 2009. But instead, Pulte is going after people that President Trump doesn't like. So again, this is at the very least. Do I think that this is going to be a good thing for the economy? Probably not. Meanwhile, the S&P 500 has fallen for the 5th consecutive day because Walmart put out its earnings and its shares dipped more than 4% because they beat the quarterly sales estimate, but they missed their earnings expectations. That's the first time that Walmart has missed its quarterly earnings expectations since May of 2022. And again, we are still waiting to hear from Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell on Friday in Jackson Hole, where he could actually explain what the hell he is thinking here. The market this week, according to CNBC, has been pressured by a heavy bout of selling. Investors took profits from high-flying names, including NVIDIA, Palantir, and Meta. Adam Crisafulli, founder of Vital Knowledge, said there just hasn't been much conviction behind the recent bout of tech selling, and most people assume it will be over relatively soon. This mindset suggests a dangerous degree of complacency. It means the pain trade will be for the tech underperformance to continue. And again, an enormous amount of what is going on right now has to do with variable economic policy. It does. According to the Labor Department, they put out a report today. Jobless claims total 235,000 for the week ending August 16th. That is up 11,000 from the prior period, higher than the Dow Jones consensus estimate for 225,000. It was the highest level since June 21st. Continuing claims rose to 1.97 million. Meanwhile, the Federal Reserve of Philadelphia's manufacturing index for August posted an unexpectedly weak reading of negative 0.3%. That is down 15.9 from the prior month and below the estimate for 7.0. So, again, I've been saying all along that I do not think that classical economic theory is wrong. I just think it takes a while for everything to materialize. And my great hope for President Trump is that he watches the numbers. I know that he does. And that while watching the numbers, the president of the United States starts to make the kinds of policy changes that are likely to lead to long-term and short-term economic booms. And meanwhile, speaking of corporate America, Cracker Barrel is now under fire. Why? What did Cracker Barrel do? Well, they changed their logo. Their logo used to be, I thought, rather charming. It's kind of a middle-aged farmer, white guy, sitting on a chair, leaning against a barrel with a logo that said Cracker Barrel, Old Country Store. And it was kind of charming. It didn't look generic. And now their new logo is basically just like, they kept the same letters for Cracker Barrel, the same font and everything, but they just got rid of the dude leaning on the barrel and the chair and the Old Country Store, and they just made it into like a yellow block that kind of looks like you're driving into a Carl's Jr. or something. I do not like. I guess that the shape is supposed to be in the shape of a sideways barrel, but I mean, you'd have to kind of think about that. I guess it's a bad move. It's a very bad move. It is getting rid of historic IP in favor of something absolutely and ridiculously generic. So when it first opened in 1969, apparently Cracker Barrel had a logo with just text. In 1977, it updated its logo to have that dude who is resting by the barrel. The restaurant says the new logo is now rooted even more closely to the iconic barrel shape and wordmark that started it all. Apparently, it also noted that farm fresh scrambled eggs and buttermilk biscuits were the inspiration behind the color palette in the new campaign. All right. I mean, sure, I guess. Whatever. The new updates are part of the company's All the More campaign that positions the iconic American brand for the future. So apparently, here's Cracker Barrel CEO Julie Fels-Massino trying to explain why they just mutilated the logo this way.
What if all the customers are coming at you hard enough about the look of the restaurant and they want to go back to the old way? Would you do it?
Honestly, the feedback's been overwhelmingly positive that people like what we're doing. I'll give you another soundbite. I actually happened to be in Orlando last week with all of our managers. We bring them together and every other year. And the number one question that I got asked, Michael, was, how can I get a remodel? When can I get a remodel? How do I get on the list?
Oh, really?
So because the feedback and the buzz is so good, not only from our customers, but from our team members. They want to work in a wonderful restaurant. So we're doing everything for our guests and our team members.
Okay, so, again, this is reminiscent, not in the same sort of way. This is very reminiscent of that time that you remember there used to be Aunt Jemima syrup that was in your refrigerator, and now it's Pearl Milling Company. You don't know that it's called Pearl Milling Company, by the way. That's the first that you've heard about this. It just looked like the same color, so you picked it up at the grocery store. And during the great racial reckoning of 2020, they decided they had to redo the entire logo for Aunt Jemima's, pancake flour, and all the rest, which, again, is kind of bizarre because the actual story of the woman who was Aunt Jemima is a fascinating story. Her name was Nancy Green. And according to ABC News, she was born into slavery in Montgomery County, Kentucky. She moved to a deeply divided Chicago. She became a strong voice at Olivet Baptist Church. And apparently, Green is the essential worker. She was seen as like one of the key parts. Many people's kitchens were sort of integrated this way. And ABC actually found a descendant of this woman who said that actually he was kind of sad that they got rid of this. Apparently, he said she was the trusted face back then. Anybody who would look at an African-American woman cooking and they knew they could trust her cooking, that she could cook. And they got rid of it anyway. And this was supposed to make the country better. Obviously, this has fixed everything. So I'm not sure what Cracker Barrel is doing here. It doesn't make a lot of sense. Cracker Barrel does, of course, have many DEI initiatives. If you take a look at their corporate website, they have the LGBTQ plus minus divided by sign alliance. They have a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging department. In other words, they do all of the usual sort of left-wing tropes. They have a group inside the company called Be Bold to cultivate and develop black leaders within the Cracker Barrel organization, utilizing allyship, mentorship, and education to create a path to continued excellence, blah, 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 blah. They have the Cracker Barrel Neurodiverse Collective, which is interesting. They have Hola, which is the group inside Cracker Barrel that promotes Hispanic and Latino culture through hiring, developing, and retaining talent within Cracker Barrel. So basically, they're just a generic New York-based kind of company, I suppose. It seems like that's what they're doing. Well, my guess is that when you lose that local flavor, you probably will lose some sales as well. We'll find out. It is kind of sad that so much of the IP of America is just getting more and more generic. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when McDonald's had the big golden arches outside, and now they've decided to dump that in so many places, and they've instead gone with this very generic logo. I don't know. This kind of stuff I'm not a big fan of. Alrighty, folks, the show continues for our members right now. We'll get to the latest on Ukraine. It seems like Vladimir Putin not up for a deal. Not particularly shocking. Remember, in order to watch, you have to be a member. If you're not a member, become a member. Use code Shapiro at checkout for 2 months free on all annual plans. Click that link in the description and join us.